The images. I am going to ask members of the committee to have a 1 minute silence for Kieran Mulholland in memory and appreciation of his service to this particular committee. I think he'll be sorely missed, and his ability to understand planning was second to none. So we'll commence with a minute's silence. You don't need to stand. Thank you. As yet, there are no funeral arrangements. For the benefit of the members of the public at the rear, just to give you an indication of the procedure this morning, some of you are here just to observe the debates. Others have indicated to the clerk that you wish to address the committee. When we reach that stage of the agenda, the lead officer will give a brief summary of the application before us and then hand over to the vice chairman, who will invite the speakers to the top of the chamber where they can present their case to members of the committee. So without further ado, we'll proceed with the agenda before us. Procedural items, declaration of interest. No, thank you. Confirmation of minutes. The minutes in question are those held on the 11th of January 2023, previously circulated. Who will move that they are correct record? Thank you. Substitute members, Christine. So we move on to the decision items. The batting order this morning is items 5, 7, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2. So we move straight on to item 5. Mithop Road, St Anne's, Lytham St Anne's.
Thank you, Chairman. As the Chairman said, I'll do a brief presentation to set the scene and then pause for the speakers. So I think we have 2 speakers on this application. So this application relates to a replacement dwelling at property at number 120 Mithop Road in Lytham. So if you look at the screen, you can see the red circle is roughly the application site. So to familiarise yourself, this is Lytham Road, Preston Road, coming into Lytham from Wharton direction. The Saltcoats roundabout up to Green Drive 5 and then Mithop Road. Mithop Road comes off in this direction to the YMCA, for those who know that area. The application, it's a detached dwelling, so it's located at the junction of Mythock Road and Fairsnake Road, which are residential streets. The property was a true bungalow, but there was a planning permission granted in 2021 for a series of extensions to that property. When that construction of that planning permission commenced, the property was actually demolished. And so whilst work has continued and has now been all but completed on the property, because the property being demolished, it can't be under the planning permission for extension to the dwelling. So this application was then submitted as a attempt to regularise that situation. So this application is for a replacement dwelling. Now, it's of a very similar design and scale and appearance to the property that would have resulted from the extension scheme, but it is a full application because, as I say, the property was demolished. The application is in front of you at committee because there's been a series of comments made to us about the application by one of the neighbours. And there's been a complaint to the Ombudsman about the handling of various aspects of the case, and it's been put to us that it's better to have the decision made in a public forum like this. So that's what we're doing. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission, and just to briefly explain the scheme further, this is a closer aerial of the property. So it's this corner property here. So that's Mythock Road and Fairsnake Road. This is the situation beforehand. So this is the true bungalow that was on site. It's a row. You can see it's in a row of other true bungalows. Properties around it are more two-storey. These are some before and after pictures. So this is looking down Fairsnake Road. So the top picture is the previous. This is from Google Street View, obviously, but the top picture is how it previously was. And the bottom picture is by and large how it now is. I think these were taken in October last year. So you can see that it's a larger property. It's taller. It's got dormers to the Fairsnake Road side, and there are also dormers to the rear side as well. This is trying to do the same approach. So this is looking from Mythock Road. So this is the roof of the property. This is the roof of the neighbouring property with the caravan motorhome in the driveway. And this is the property as it now is viewed from Mythock Road. So that's what we're talking about. And at that point, I'll break for the speakers, John.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. It's really important before I invite the two speakers on this particular item up to the podium, just to emphasise that we very much acknowledge and value the involvement of the public and their particular views, and this is a public platform in which you can express concerns regarding an application, or indeed, whether you like the application or not. You get 3 minutes, which is very precise, in which to say what you would like to say. At the end of 3 minutes, I will gently intervene to ask you to complete within the next sentence. If you do continue beyond that point, I will just ask you to stop. So hopefully it doesn't come to that, and the 3 minutes will be adequate. But just to say thank you for coming this morning, and people in the public gallery as well. So it's really important that you've shown that commitment and interest. So thank you. On this particular item, I think we've got Linda Pickin. So if Linda is here, if you'd like to come up, the microphone is already switched on, Linda. So as soon as you indicate you'd like to start, they'll off you go. Okay.
Thank you.
Take your time. Okay, but 3 minutes. Thank you.
Our objections are the major adverse impact on our home. Loss of light to the kitchen, as the proposed plan shows side boundary to Fairsnake Road is 7.2 metres and only 1.2 metres from the boundary wall to 122 Mythock Road. This is before the render is applied, so we'll be even closer. The overhang is 2 to 3 inches from the boundary, with dormers above, blocking all our natural sunlight daylight, blocking 70% to 85% within the seasons. So no matter what time of day you enter the kitchen, lights have to be put on due to the extreme darkness. The kitchen window has been in the same place since the bungalow was built in the 1960s. Privacy has major impact. As you wash up, the rear door on proposed plans open. You see directly in sink, freezer, fridge, ironing holder, and animal print ironing board. Rear garden is overshadowed by the proposed structure, which is overbearing in size. Enclosing feeling hemmed in, with it windows overlooking directly into the rear garden. The planning history of the previous granted scheme has no evidence of consideration of key material issues in case officer's report, which explains council reached the original decision for loss of light, privacy, overshadowing, overbearing the cases due to the missing loss reports. On the 16th of November 2021, 9:52 a.m., email was received by Mr. Stell advising communication with the applicant, who was advised to cease work on the development. 21st of November 2021, 14:44 p.m. Mr. Stell email. It is unfortunate applicant decided to continue work despite the advice to cease work several times regarding the status of the development. This advice was ignored. If the planning committee would like to defer decision and visit site to see the major day-to-day impacts on our lives, all extremely welcome too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You set a good precedent for everybody else now, well within the 3 minutes. So thank you very much. Having explained the protocol, could I ask Mr. Paul Duckworth now, please, who's the applicant, to come forward, please? So I won't go through the whole. Okay, no, but to take note of that. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for letting me address the committee. When we first put the application in, we worked with our consultant, the planning department, Ruth Thor, and ourselves to complete our design. Backwards and forwards with the planning department to come up with the previous design, which included all the features that are on the property now. I will say there's no difference in the size or the shape of the property for the second application. Andrew made reference that we ended up knocking the property down. That was in conjunction with the building control, Andy Thomas. When he attended site and we started doing the foundation work, it was impossible to save the portion of the property that we intended to. We didn't want to knock it down, it was extra cost for us, but the house is so badly built on a just complete raft, we had only one option. It was unsafe to do any more work. So that's why we've ended up demolishing the original property. Regarding some of the issues being raised about light, covering of light, when we put the application in, Ruth attended site. After all the neighbours received the letters, I approached all the neighbours and told them all, if you've got any concerns, please come and ask me and talk to me rather than any. Both neighbours on First Nave and the adjacent property said, no problem, the application, we won't be putting any objections in. So, but I always said, open dialogue, please come and talk to me. I've had none of that. Regarding when it was identified that we had knocked the property down when Andrew attended site, I was Richard, the enforcement officer, attended site. He said, and I stopped work at that time by agreement. We did not carry on the build at that point. The walls were already up to the height of the house. So we know we completely didn't carry on work until Andrew attended site with Richard. We crawled all over the site and it was agreed at that point, we have only built what we've got planning for. Now at that point, we were living in a caravan on the site. We should have been in by Christmas. Because of the delay, the stop that we agreed to, we didn't, and we ended up having to leave the caravan and go in rented accommodation because we missed our deadline for our contractors to come at more cost for us and more time. We did not do any work without agreement. When Andrew attended site, spoke to him about it, and Andrew's words were that you are only building what you've got planning permission for. Understood that we had to put a second application in because of the demolishing the project. I said, I need to carry on. I said, because I've had to build this house myself because we lost the contractor. But we did not do any work without not authorization, but the understanding from Andrew that we were only building what we had planning permission for. Regarding the planning, the first application, regarding the design of it all, we spoke with Ruth and the team about, the window position. I offered up, didn't need to be told what type of glass to put in there. We put the highest grade obscure glass, so there is no detriment to anybody's privacy. The fact that we've moved the private area that was at the back of the house actually increases privacy for the neighbours and us, so we're not adjoining. And that was part of the design that we want.
I think with respect now, that noise.
Is that my 3 minutes?
Sorry.
Sorry. Right, okay, so just in essence, we have not done anything underhanded or to undermine anything. We've worked with everybody from building control, planning department and the enforcement officer to be able to get to the point with this new application.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Cook. That concludes the speakers on item 5.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. We'll just leave a couple of minutes for Jane to settle down.
I have to get back in May, so nightmare roads. Thank you.
Okay. Andrew, we conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an elevation view of the property. Obviously, I've shown you the pictures. So these are the plans of the property that we're talking about. So the top one is the elevation that faces onto Fair Snape Road, and the bottom one is the elevation that faces onto the property that Mrs. Pickin occupies, number 122. So what we're looking at here is the habitable rooms are on the front, bedrooms and lounge, and then there's a study, a bathroom, some secondary windows to a lounge, and the back door, all of which are obscured, and then there are windows in the dormer which are also obscurely glazed. Looking at the front elevation, this is the elevation that faces Mythock Road, we call it the front. So you're looking at the dormers that you could see previously. 2-storey porch gable feature to the front, and then the front door to the property. This is intended to be a street scene drawing. So taking you back to some of the points that have been raised by the speakers, the properties are close. This is the side of Mrs. Pickin's property. So the kitchen window is on that, and I've got a photo that shows it is on that line there. So you do have that close proximity. There are quite a significant overhang to the eaves to the property. So there is that relationship issue there to look at. The purpose of this slide is to show you that, but also to show you the comparison to the scheme that was previously approved. So you can see that whilst there may be some changes in terms of the porch and particularly the eaves height, the schemes are by and large the same. I think it's stretching it to say they are identical, but they are certainly very similar. I've measured the property a couple of times. It's in the same place as was approved, it's to the same broad dimensions, other than these changes that you can see there. Looking at plan views of it, essentially that's explaining what I've described about the internal layout. So it fronts onto Fair Snape Road and it fronts onto Mythock Road as well here, with the first floor providing a series of bedrooms, including ones on the rear, which have obscure glass to them. So looking at the sort of the main planning issues that are raised, site's in a settlement, it's in a residential area, it has a previous use as a dwelling, so the erection of a replacement dwelling is something that would be acceptable in principle. The extension previously was very similar to that's the resultant of the current property. So that planning decision is a material consideration in our assessment of this application, because we've assessed something against the same local plan policies very recently, 2021. And as I said at the outset, the reason for the committee here is due to a complaint about that, about the way that the application has been handled. Second key element relates to the street scene. So character of the area, whilst the properties were bungalows, the character of the area is relatively mixed. There are a range of properties on Mythock Road. There's perhaps more cohesion with the Fairstnate Road frontage, which has 2-storey on one side, a single storey on the other. But down Mythock Road, there is a real mix. And as a result of that, it's not the case that putting a dormers onto an existing bungalow is something that would be harmful, particularly where the property is like this one in a corner location, where it's better able to take that increase of scale without harming the street scene. The property is more modern in its design. It's got a range of different materials and roof types on it, but it's got more modern glazing approach than more modern rendering approach than you would see in the properties around it that were built at the 50s or whenever. But that's not untypical, because there have been other replacement and extended properties in the area. So the street scene arrangement, to my view, is perfectly acceptable. These are perhaps some better pictures than I was able to show you before. So you can see how you've got a relatively modern approach to the Mythock Road frontage, relatively modern approach to the Fairstnate Road frontage with the bifolding doors, and then you've got landscaping that softens it to the Mythock Road frontage also. So in terms of residential amenity, I think that's the key issue here. If we look at the four neighbouring aspects, there's a neighbour on Fairstnate Road, which is, if you're looking at the bifolding doors to the right, this application property's got its garage and driveway to that side. The neighbour's got their garage and driveway. The relationship there is an acceptable one. Across Fairstnate Road, looking out from the front, the 3 dormers on the front, well, good separation, 27-metre separation, so there's no amenity issues there. Looking at the other front, across Mythock Road, even greater separation, no impacts there of any note. Looking to the side, so the Mythock Road side, it's 122, isn't it? That's the key assessment, and I think there are some harmful impacts there. So if I go through those in a little more detail, this is the pictures from the original site visit. So this is the arrangement as it was when the properties were built. So taking the left-hand picture, the property that you see with the dog in the garden, this is the application property as it used to be. So you've got this brick boundary, and then this is the neighbouring property with a bathroom window, kitchen window, which is the white one, and then this porch feature that surrounds their back door. You can see that is close to the boundary, and then there was a relative close proximity to where the property was previously. This is the view from the kitchen window as was. So that's there as a comparison with the current arrangement, which is this. So this is views from within the kitchen that the first speaker, Mrs. Pickin, referenced. So as a relatively similar view, the view is now relatively similar view to the previous one I showed you. The view is now of the dwelling, but it is substantially closer. It's set just over 1 metre inside the boundary, with about 1 metre on the neighbour's side. And so the view from closer out is of that blank wall with this is the back door that was referenced in Mrs. Pickin's comments. You can see this picture, this window's over the sink. Looking between the properties now, so if you compare that to the picture with the dog on it, you can see that the property has moved across. The eaves are close to the boundary, and the impact on this property is greater, clearly, than it previously was. And going back to the dog picture. So we need to look at that impact carefully. And having done so, it's the same assessment that we made at the time of the extension, because the property's in the same place. And the views reached is that essentially it's an acceptable impact. The level of impact there is acceptable. In terms of the massing in terms of the garden relationship, if I deal with that first, there is greater massing to the garden. There is the potential for privacy loss from the first floor windows into the garden, but that's dealt with. Well, the massing isn't excessive due to the design of the dormers and the height of the property, and the privacy matters are dealt with by the use of obscure glazing to those windows, and there is a condition suggested on the agenda papers to require that those windows are obscurely glazed and are top openers, so there's no view out of them when they're open into that garden area. In terms of the relationship to the kitchen, the dwelling, there is clearly a greater massing impact. The wall is much closer, the eaves are there and overhang up to the boundary, and that does impact on that habitable room to a degree. And the assessment we've had to make is whether that impact is to a degree that makes it unacceptable. The officer view at the time of the extension application was that it wasn't, and having visited the site and perhaps taken account of the fact that this kitchen window is located halfway down the property already on that side, where there would always be the potential for the neighbouring property to extend either through permitted development rights or through a planning permission up to that point. I think we have to, in some ways, bear that in mind when we are looking at the impact on that property. So having done that, we concluded previously that it was acceptable, and given the similarity of the scheme now to that which was previously approved, the recommendation here is that it is also acceptable. The final bullet point there is that the privacy matter, yes, if the door was open, there would be, and you were stood in a particular place of the kitchen, there would be a potential view between. But again, that's a matter that was in the previous decision, albeit the back door was in a slightly different place. It was slightly more straight on actually than has been built. So that's something that I don't feel is a significant matter. And that's really all there is on this application. It is recommended for approval, and I'm happy to take any queries and questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Open to debate. Speakers, please. Councillor Nolte.
Yeah, I have to say I don't like it. I wouldn't like somebody living that close to me, but there you go. I just want, this huge overhang, it seems an unusual feature. Was that in the original application? I presume it's to cater for a bigger dormer upstairs, but it does seem an odd, it doesn't help the situation that there's a huge overhang. I mean, yeah, they're close, but that huge overhang seems to impact, well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So two questions. The first one, yes, it was in the previous scheme,
Right.
and that's why I've put this slide up to show that the current proposal's the top, the previous approved scheme was the bottom. So that eaves overhang, it's a feature all around the property. It's not just down that side, it's all around. I suspect it is a consequence of the design and the provision of the first floor accommodation at the property. When I think the applicant spoke, he said there'd been some evolution of the design previously when it was first submitted. The first application was very much for a true house, and part of our view on that was it was unacceptable. So we sought to revise that, and as part of that revision, that's where these dormer features came into it. And I think that the eaves overhang isn't so much as a design feature. It's more of a to deal with the roof slope and the way that that needs to come down to that sort of a level to function as a roof, given the extent of the first floor accommodation that remains in the property.
The other thing, you referred to the garden. You didn't refer to the light in the garden. I think the first speaker spoke about the garden being completely overshadowed. I presume, I mean, there is a test for the amount of light available and what have you. I presume that was all catered for in the first application, was it?
Yes, it was, and I'm afraid I've not been able to locate a picture that shows the property from the rear garden. But if you look at this slide, that's the rear garden to the neighbouring property. This is the previous property the application property as it previously was. So obviously the sun comes round that way. There will have previously been an impact on that garden. There will be a slightly greater impact in terms of the massing and loss of light into that garden. At certain times of the year when the sun's setting and it's lower in the sky, that kind of thing, coming from the west and the northwest. But the assessment made at the outline at the extension time, and having stood in that garden, I don't feel that the loss of light is particularly significant into that garden area. Appreciate I've visited 2 or 3 times. I haven't visited at different times of the year and different times of the day, but that I can understand why the assessment was originally made that was acceptable.
Okay. So the nub of the matter is that it was demolished. I mean, one speaker said it was demolished and never stopped. The other speaker said it was stopped. Are we allowed to know what the actual facts are? Was there a stop order put on it? Was it?
Yeah, there was no formal action taken. When the council was made aware that works were commencing and the enforcement officer visited, I believe he asked that work cease until we could consider, what to do. My recollection is that I think works did cease. I then made a visit with the enforcement officer, and we had a good measure round and a look at the works that were taking place, and took the view that they were of such similarity to the scheme that was approved under the extension that it wouldn't be expedient for us to serve an enforcement notice to require that those works cease. At that point, my recollection is that the works commenced, and obviously they have continued to commence, and the property has been occupied now for a period of months.
Thank you.
It's to do with the similarity to the previous scheme that meant it would have been difficult for us to justify serving a formal notice to require works to cease, given the existence of that planning permission that created something that was so similar to what was being constructed on site.
Yeah. I'll see what other speakers think. For me, I think that the problem probably lies with it being approved in its first iteration, where things might have been a bit improved. Yeah.
That's why the report refers to that as a material consideration. That's why I covered it in the presentation,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it is a key element of
It
the
is.
decision
And
on this
it's whether,
application.
had it come here and we'd discussed it, I don't think we'd have approved it in the way it is. But I'll see what other people think. Thank you.
You're invited. So, I mean, can we just look at the key sort of diagrams of current proposal and approved design, etc.? The differences. You put it up there a minute or two ago.
That one there.
That one, yeah. Because Councillor Nolte was talking about what the nub of the problem is here. Now, for me, the nub of the problem is, it's this. This encapsulates the argument really, and I suppose the judgment is current proposal approved scheme. There are differences, and it's a judgment in terms of, is it sufficient impact to refuse this scheme, or is it vastly similar to the scheme that was already approved? And that basically, when you look at those two diagrams, fundamentally, yes, there are differences in terms of the roof being higher and the front porch being in line, I think. And tell me, Andrew, if I'm wrong here, but I think you were talking about both the original application and this application was always going to be a metre inside the boundary, I think you were talking about.
Yeah, that's why I've put
So,
this.
so closer to the other house.
Exactly. That's why I've put this is a street scene view. So the property on the left is the neighbour's property. So that obviously hasn't moved, and the proximity to it hasn't changed between this scheme and the approved scheme. The changes are that there's been a reposition of the door. There's the roof eaves are slightly taller, and as you say, the porch feature on the front is revised in its width and its height. There have been some other changes to the garage is slightly taller as well at the back, but I think that's largely irrelevant in terms of the Councillor Nutty's nub of the issue.
But to go back to this fundamental point, the changes which we can see are marginal, and the judgment is, in terms of privacy, light, massing, etc., neighbourhood amenity, all the way around. We've looked at the other houses next door, across the road, you know, further up, across the other side. The judgment is that, of course, there always is an impact on the development, and the marginal differences obviously will add to that impact, but are not sufficient in your view for this to be refused. Now, I would have to say, on balance, I would agree with that, so I will move the application, but I obviously will wait for what others people say, but I'm willing to.
Well, I will second that proposal. Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, just a question really.
We've been put in a position where it's been approved, not by us, and maybe we wouldn't have approved it. But we're in a situation where it has an approval, and we're put in that difficult position. So, yeah, we just.
The point you made originally, that in the absence of a previous application and approval, we'd have looked on this application in a different light. Yeah. And that's the dilemma that you've got. But of course, we appreciate how planning works, and I think is the reason why the Vice Chairman and Chairman have moved approval. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Please show. Right, I appreciate that. Those against? That's clearly carried. Three abstentions. Can we move on? Item 7.
Page 167. Peter Harden. Okay, this is also an application for a house extension. albeit this one's not retrospective. This relates to a property at number 10, the Boulevard, which is in St Anne's, just down there. So it's on the run between here and AKS school. Again, property is in a very much a residential area. It's a semi-detached 2-storey house. There's no particular designations there. And the scheme in this case relates to a single-storey extension to the side and the rear, a first-floor extension to the rear, and a dormer to the rear. This is at committee because the town council have objected, and they've raised concerns over the scale of the extension and the massing caused by the upper floor extensions. But the application is again recommended for approval. To show you some pictures of that on a particularly frosty day. The application site is the one on the left. So that's from the front. So you can see it's got a driveway to the side, a driveway to the side of the neighbouring property. From the back, this is the back of the garage, which has been extended rearwards. Bay windows, bow bay windows, and then sort of an adjoining outbuilding that's attached to the adjoining property. These are some pictures to show the scheme. Sorry, they show the layout to the neighbour. So that's obviously the neighbour to one side and the neighbour to the other. I haven't put a picture of the plans here, but the extension comes out from the back of the garage and across. Comes out 2 metres from the back of the garage and then squares off across that patio area to the back door of this outbuilding. That's single storey, and then it's replacing the bay with a square bay and then adding a dormer onto the roof.
Thank you. We have one speaker on item 7, and I believe that is Mr. Jonathan White. And I think you were in when I was explaining the protocol before, so I probably don't need to go through that. Just to remind you that 3 minutes, and then hopefully you can say what you want to say in that time. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to express my opinion. Right. I still have some questions concerning the materials for the garage and the rendering and how it's going to be continued, how rainwater will be dealt with, and the roof lights, forward lighting are still issues. You know, I'm sure I can resolve them with consultation with number 10, but you know, the forward lighting might be an issue. Will there be additional noise due to the forward living area? I don't know. The dormer, I still think the dormer is oversized despite it being a permitted development. I don't think it sits well with the 1920s semi-detached dormer-free houses it is adjacent to. The dormer's not well screened from direct views to my garden or surrounding properties at the rear, and has an impact on the character and appearance there, even if the various street scene examples satisfying planning guidelines, you know, are assessed as causing no material harm. A level of mutual overlooking between the properties certainly does exist, but the dormer will increase that. It stated that separation distances at 33 metres and 35 metres, respectively, between the neighbours and the application property at the rear would not lead to any undue loss of privacy. It does does beg the question for me, at what separation distance would loss of privacy actually be an issue? The new bay window at the first floor level, I agree that the bay window at the first floor level is only marginally more than from the rear elevation than the existing bay window. But I simply repeat my earlier point that it's a shame to replace an original and traditional feature. The single-storey rear and side extension. The single-storey garage attached to the side elevation of the property is not really an original feature, so there's already an extension to the boundary at the rear of the property. I don't know how far that goes forward. But actually, the single-storey rear side extension will probably increase privacy for number 8. So, you know, I'm not wholly opposed to the single-storey. I'm not opposed to the single-storey rear extension, really. To summarise, the design does have some merit. It uses natural materials, for example, and solar panels. But I think it's more suited to a detached house in its own grounds, really. It is out of character with the adjacent, semi-detached red brick properties that still retain the character and traditional features of a 1920s St Anne's house.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just pausing there, but thank you for that contribution. Thank you for coming. And that concludes the speakers for item 7.
Thank you. Okay, so this is to try and give you a bit more clarity about the scale of the nature of the scheme that's been put to us. This is the ground floor plan as is. So if you recall the images, we had this outbuilding to one side, patio area which goes up to that line, and then the garage which extended beyond the back of the property. So this is the proposal. So the proposal widens that garage, that outbuilding slightly, and then brings in a single-storey extension that comes up to a point that's 2 metres back from the back line of the existing garage, which you know, I'm sure is an extension to the property from looking at the pictures. In elevation terms, this is what we get. So if I deal with the one on the right first, so the garage comes back, rendered extension that squares off the back of the property as we saw on the plan view. Above that, the round bow window is squared off, so there's not a significant increase in its projection, but it's just providing a square bay to the property. And then above that is this rendered, this dormer feature, which sits in the roof, has been slightly revised since the plans were first submitted to try and coordinate the windows a little bit better. But with reference to the permitted development rights, which was discussed by the speaker there, a dormer of that size and location would be permitted development if it were constructed in materials that matched the existing roof or of a similar appearance to the existing roof. These aren't, because the proposal is to timber clad that in the way that there's proposals to clad this element as well. So there's a change to the rear elevation of the property to try and give it an overall cohesive design and materials, and that's what's brought in this requirement for planning permission for the dormer element. The other elements would need planning permission irrespective of that. This is a plan view of the first floor and second floor accommodation. So if you look at this element here, you can see in red, hopefully, the bow window. So you can see the relatively minimal element of extension that's involved in that squaring off that bay, that bow. And then at second floor, you see the accommodation that's provided in the dormer. So there's a Velux window in the front elevation, and then in the dormer in the rear serves a bedroom and a bathroom. Looking at it in street scene views, the area is, as the speaker said, typical 1920s St Anne's properties, not an unpleasant area. Again, a bit of a mixture of styles. You see from the top picture there, you've got bungalows on the corner, which is Kintbury Avenue. So you would see the dormer over the roof of that dormer. from that image. Less visible to the rear. The properties on Newbury Avenue are relatively tightly spaced. So the views in the street scene that you would get of the upper floor works are much more minimal. But there is clearly that gap you see in the top picture where you would see the dormer through there. So in terms of the considerations that we need to look at, properties in the settlement, extensions in settlement properties generally supported, subject to design and amenity issues. The design elements are, it's the full rear extent elevation of the property, so it is adding a cohesive design to that elevation. That's not to say that the existing property isn't unattractive, because I think it is, and I certainly don't disagree with the point made on that by the speaker. But the decision here is whether the works that are proposed are appropriate, and given the modernisation that it brings to the property and the use of materials that all sit together, I feel that the design is an acceptable one. The property is not listed, it's not in a conservation area, there's no particular designation that would prevent those works. Looking at the various impacts, if we go around the property, the adjacent property, the extensions alongside the outbuilding, and the first floor extension is set in from that, and obviously the dormer is also set in from the boundary. So there's no particular impacts, massing or anything like that from that element, other than the concerns over privacy loss that the speaker mentioned, the speakers from the other side. The dormer roof will allow views into the garden from the bedroom window there, albeit those views are already existing from the floor below. The first floor window allows views, so there is a slightly greater view from the increased height, but that's not something that would be a material change to justify a refusal of planning permission. Again, we perhaps need to bear in mind that a dormer of that scale and nature could be added, you know, as permitted development, subject to use of different materials. The speaker mentioned the distances to the other, the privacy distances as what's undue, and 33 metres I think was quoted as not being undue. We use a distance of 21 metres, a standard planning distance of 21 metres is where we would generally not go below to ensure that privacy is protected. So if I'm looking at the properties to the rear, they're well above that at the 33 distance. Looking at the other side property, that's not been extended, and so whilst the rearward projection of the garage will have a greater impact on the patio area at the rear of that property, the 2 metre projection that's proposed isn't one that conflicts with our guidance or will have any undue impact on that property. So there is a slight increase in height also, but that's, again, it's not something that would lead to a harmful impact that could justify a reason for refusal due to the impact on that neighbour. Just talked about the length of the gardens and the privacy to the rear. The street scene, I've showed you the pictures there. The town council raised concern over that. As I said when I talked about the pictures, the views are relatively glimpsed views between properties and also are of a distance. So I don't feel that there is a harmful street scene impact on as a result of the works. And talked about the dormer, and so as a summary, sort of recommend that the planning permission is granted as on the agenda papers.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. Are there any other on that row of houses in that particular? Are there any other developments like this that it's already been sort of done, or would this be the first and set some sort of a precedence for, oh, that looks okay, let's all have one?
I'm not entirely sure that there are a significant number like that. I must admit, I haven't sort of travelled around that area particularly to look at them. There are a mixture of properties styles in there. Whilst the properties on the boulevard are similar, I think the properties on surrounding streets vary a bit more. And I'm just trying to get to the street view images to show you that. Just give me a second. Over there. So this is the boulevard. So this is the application property. Is in there, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So you can see there's a commonality of design in terms of that particular location in the immediate vicinity. There are other rendered properties, if that was your query. If we come round this corner, you get into this, there's obviously a different type of property just round the corner where you've got dormers front and rear. If we come round to the rear again, we've got bungalows that are a mixture of dormers and hipped roofs and gabled roofs. This is the properties on Newbury which is to the rear, which unfortunately are screened by the trees there. But again, you're seeing a mixture of roof pitches, roof styles. So I think the point of trying to do that was that in its immediate area, this will be different, but in its not that much wider area, you do have a bit of a variation, all of which are, they're all of the same sort of era, other than the dormer bungalow on the side road. They are all of that 20s, 30s, St Anne's sort of era.
From the actual front of the property.
It wouldn't be visible from the front. From the rear, I think I mentioned in the presentation that the properties are relatively closely spaced, so the views between them are limited. The views that you do get are those down Kintbury where you see it in that gap there. That's the one that I showed in the slide. So it's the second property along, so it's onto that it's into that roof slope there, where you would get the angled views of the cheeks to the dormer as much as anything.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you to the speaker, who obviously, with having speakers about any sort of extensions next door to your own property, it brings it home that we're not here in denial, I think, in terms of it has some impact. And it's really important, I think, when we have speakers that they remind us of that. It is the extent and the degree of that impact measured. There is always a subjectivity in these sort of judgments, but I was just looking at a few points here. I mean, the principle of sort of, in this residential area, it's a settlement area. There was mention about a bay being lost, but again, very few people can see that, if anybody, the impact there. The privacy issues in terms of next door, my biggest concern would have been the overlooking of the gardens from the dormer window, the additional dormer window that's being put in the roof. But we now know, don't we, that this would have been a permitted development anyway if it hadn't been for the choice of materials. So in a sense, that sort of means they could have done that and there would have been that impact. The separation distances are exceeded, and all round we have to accept that there is some negative impact, but I would say it is not substantial, and I agree with the judgment that it would not be sufficient for us to have planning grounds to refuse this application. So I will second the application.
Thank you. Councillor Speak.
Thank you, Chairman. So the main policy here that relates to this application is GD7. And although it's not everybody's choice what the applicant wants to do, when you look at GD7, you've got to ensure the siting, layout, massing, scale and design relate well to the surrounding context. Now, if there are massive alterations to the front and the same as in the same design as what's proposed, then we would have a problem. And it's to be sympathetic to the surrounding land uses and occupiers. Well, is it sympathetic? All the planning policy and guidelines say it doesn't exceed visual and distancing. And does it make a positive contribution to the character and local distinctiveness? But again, because it's at the rear and from the front of this property, you won't be able to see these changes. I don't see that we have any reasons then to support it. But it's not everybody's cup of tea. But it meets the planning policies that are in place. Thank you.
It's just a quick one. The speaker mentioned the materials, and I presume it was the back bit. Is there any, you know, would there be any alternative to the type of materials that are used? Or I think it was it, is it cladding or what? I don't know. Sorry. I mean, it's a minor point, but it does alter the character from the back. Now, how many people can see it from the back, I don't know. And is it material? Very few.
Is this the materials used?
That's what I'm saying. Is it a material? Mm. Yeah, that's
Yeah, so the proposal is to, obviously, looking at the back of the property now, it's all brick.
yeah.
The proposal on the elevations is to use the an off-white render, so the mottled areas that you see on the side of the garage. What's my laser point? The mottled areas you see on the side of the garage here. Sorry for whizzing that around. That would be render. So that's on the rear elevation at first floor, and then you're looking at timber cladding, vertically hung. So that's what that indication is. So that's into the areas between the windows. And then you're looking at black fascias and then slate to the side of the dormers, which shows up here. So you do have a different materials palette to what everything, you know, it's red brick, ready pink tiles. What you're looking at now is going to be more off-white, timber, which presumably will fade to silver, and a grey lead. So you have got a change.
Yeah.
But you have, at least what you get in there is more of a cohesive change in that it's not just the ground floor or the first floor or the roof, it's the whole lot being done collectively. And the argument there is perhaps the point that Councillor Speak touched on is whether that is harmful to the property or not. And you know, it's been done cohesively. It's not a conservation. It's not a listed building. It's to the rear. So it's there would be an alternative because clearly they could build it out of brick. They could not do the timber cladding. They could put rosemary tiles clad onto the dormer. But that's not their proposal. Their proposal is to do this. And my view, as set out in the presentation and the officer report, is that that's not harmful. That's
I just thought it was worth
yeah
looking at because it does alter the appearance at
does.
the back completely.
It does.
But whether that matters or not is the point, isn't
I
it?
think,
You know?
well, I think if you recall the drive round on Street View, there are quite a number of rendered properties
Yeah.
in the area. So it's not like perhaps if you look at Lytham Avenues where everything's
Yeah,
virtually the
that's right.
same. This isn't like that. There is that mixture.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It is.
Could, on that note, could I just ask, because I just wanted to raise this, Andrew, in terms of, you know, the outlook at the back, am I right? I can't remember the road at the name of the road with the adjoining properties backing on, but it is some distance, I think. When I had a look round there, I think there is some distance between the back of this house and the first residential dwellings on the parallel road, if you know what I mean, at the back. In fact, on one of your shots, I think you showed, it's fairly distant, I think, the houses. They're not right up to the back of the gardens, which some places that is the case.
Yes, there's Newbury
Yeah,
Road at
yeah.
the bottom. So
There's a fair old separation there.
if you're looking at that distance, it's that property there, isn't it? 35 metres?
Yeah, yeah.
So if we look at a minimum standard's 21, so you half as much again, and a bit more. And it's obviously it's a consequence of the way that the streets were laid out at the time that they were developed. That you know, standards were clearly different at that point, but that perhaps makes the point again with the close distance between them, that those street scene views you're not going to see.
No.
You're not going to see that angled view between.
Piers, there's not been any objection from the back bit anyway, so from next to them, yeah.
No comments from the rear.
Right, well, it's been moved for approval by Councillor Nixon, seconded by the Vice Chairman. All in favour of that approval? Anyone against? Abstentions? One. Clearly carried. Can we move on to the next item, which is item 3, which takes us to the Windyke Farm application, a very technical application. And that commences on page 41.
I'll
Use coke. Is there air conditioning on? Is that perhaps what's making it a bit cooler? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it might be cooler down here than up here, you see. I've got this lamp grilling me. There's a fair bit of heat.
Okay, Windyke Farm. This is an application for a pub. So the Windyke site, broadly, is that area there. Okay, so and this site is that part of it. So this is the M55 junction, Blackpool that way, Whitehills that way, the sea that way. So it's part of the mixed use allocation. So it's got a specific allocation for mixed uses in the local plan. And it's also got an outline planning permission for a range of uses, including residential employment, community uses, a primary school, and all sorts of other bits of things to go with them. This application is submitted as for the reserved matters relating to the pub part of the outline planning permission. The parish council is here at committee because the parish council have objected to the development because they have concerns over the access. They also refer to there being other facilities in the area and that this is premature because there's no development on the Windyke site for this to service. The officer's recommendation is to grant planning permission for it. So as there's no speakers, I'll sort of not necessarily race through, but so this is the site in closer detail. So this yellow is Preston New Road going into Blackpool. Right. So this unusual shaped building is the Harbour Mental Health Facility. It's got a signalised junction from Preston New Road, and then the application site that we're looking at is off that to the other side of the road, to the mental health site. So this site plan shows the layout. So that's the access point, Preston New Road there, and then the pub being the dark, the access point and its car park to the rear. This line here is the borough boundary. So the front of the pub is in Blackpool and the back of the pub is in Fylde. Coincidentally, eh?
The price of drinks changes.
What that does mean is that the developer needs planning permission or reserved matters approval from both authorities. So they've submitted an application to both. They got the decision from Blackpool a little while back. So this is to bring Fylde in line with that decision if approved. So a picture. So this is looking towards Blackpool. This is the mental health, the harbour facility. This is the access point, and the site is this area of greenfield land just off to the right here. Slightly more detail of it, turned round. So pub faces the front, access down that access road that you just saw, into there, 70 odd parking spaces, space for storage and bins and all that sort of stuff. Landscaping around, picnic tables out the front, pub that looks like that. So very similar to pubs that are developed around this time. And that's been a conscious thing that we've tried to do. There's an earlier design which is a little bit more modern than that, but we sought to find something that you've got the listed windmill opposite. We looked at something that was perhaps less contentious, if you will. So that's what they're proposing. Okay. So principle of development, well, it's the outline planning permission establishes that there's planning permission for this list of uses, which include a pub or drinking establishment, as it calls it. So it's within the scope of that. The layout, the outline planning permission, requires that there is a master planned layout. So certain parts of the site are for residential, certain for employment, certain for other uses. And this site is the yellow bit here on the overall master plan. So that's for mixed uses. So that's where the other bits of things like the pub and the neighbourhood centres and things would be located. So it's covered by the outline. It complies with the layout required by the outline. It's of a suitable design for that location, and everything else about it is generally fine as well. There's been, like I say, it straddles the boundary. It's been approved by Blackpool. Whilst there may be concerns from the parish council about access, the access was the traffic generation and the position of the access. Clearly, the position of the access has been approved. The traffic generation for the development as a whole was considered as part of the outline application, so that's all acceptable. So there are no overriding issues with this application, and planning permission should be granted for it.
Thank you, Vice Chairman.
Yeah, I was involved with the Winddyke project in its inception, nominally as a sort of education consultant for the primary school side of it and everything. I think in terms of planning grounds, I don't see any reason to object to this. There may be questions about layout, etc., and all the rest of it. But the one thing I'm just going to say this on record, that considering how many years this has been being considered, and this was and still is a hugely exciting scheme. It was one of the 10 sort of healthy towns, you know, in Britain, and with underlying sort of health support and healthy living as the ethos, really. So you've got 1,400 houses, you've got an employment area, you've got a primary school, you've got medical centre, you've got community centres. The planning for this was unbelievable in terms of sustainability and supporting healthy living. Now, some people will raise their eyebrows, you know, in terms of, well, the very first thing that's happening on this site now is a pub. Now, I don't have an objection to that in itself, because a pub is obviously part of a local community. And we've seen that sort of in other developments as well. Although some developments recently have lost a lot of pubs, haven't they? You know, in terms of when housing developments, I'm thinking of the Hole in One, for example, on Hall Park Estate. But in planning grounds, you know, I'm supportive of this. I'm just sort of quite disappointed that this is the first, you know, particular project. But I have no objection to it. I think it's in a good position off that main road. It's already got access. It's got road access, you know, with traffic lights, etc. You know, with the bay on one side and the pub on the other. But I'm going to express my hope that shortly we will see all the other really exciting elements to this scheme coming forward, including, you know, the primary school and the medical centre. And there was this idea that within the residential population, they would have contact, you know, through the internet and everything, and online for diagnosis and contact with surgeries, so that, you know, people could send in their blood pressure sort of things, and that was really exciting. So it's a fantastic project, this. It's been delayed for a number of years, and if this is the sign that things are happening, I'm delighted. It just happens to be a pub, but I will actually put forward my support for the recommendation, so I'll second it.
Just to make a point about the lack of development on this site, it's a very important site, and as the local plan evolved, we were very concerned that the lack of development would lead to a breach of the 5-year housing supply figure. Well, since the review of the local plan, that figure is now 6, so we are not, it's not the sensitive site that we thought it might have been in the past. All right, 2 speakers, Councillor Speak, Councillor Nixon. Oh, but,
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it seems many years ago that we all sat through the presentations of this massive, massive proposal for Windyke, and I, for one, think it's absolutely fantastic. It's a start, a new beginning, and hopefully the start of all of this development. Probably take 10 years or more, but it's a start, so I will happily second the approval.
Thank you, Chair. I have no objection in the pub itself. It just seems odd that the first thing to go down there is a pub. When pubs are across the country closing, unfortunately, and I just hope it doesn't end up being a white elephant and not get used because there isn't anybody other than people visiting the harbour to use it at this moment in time. Yeah, but that's how it strikes me, because it is, and I hope it doesn't fail because there is nothing else in the area for now.
Andrew, I think perhaps one of the key elements of this application, why this application has come forward, my guess is that the planning permission, as any planning permission, has a timeline, and there was a requirement to submit certain work within 3 years. And then once that had been done, that extended the timeline for submitting the rest of the development. So this application was made within the right time, and now it does that. I think this plan, you'll see that big black line that is the borough boundary, that allows, this is a bit of development that's in both boroughs. So it's something that was relatively straightforward to put forward as a way of moving the application on, because I understand that there are active positive developments taking place about the better stuff that the site brings forward. So hopefully the decision today, if it goes the way that it seems to be going from the discussion, will allow those discussions to continue, and the excitement that Councillor Speake and Councillor Redcliffe mentioned with development coming forward won't be too far away, and therefore the contributions to the local plan that Councillor Fiddler mentioned will be realised soon.
Lyndon?
Yeah, I was only going to, that was exactly what I was going to say, that I can understand why Westby with Plumpton saw this just as extending the time that they can take to do that. I wasn't clear from that, the last line of that seemed to fizzle out and it said 12. The last sentence on your presentation just said 12. Does it, how long does it extend it?
Yeah, the
All within 12, what, years? Days, hopefully?
The planning permission said you need to submit reserve matters within 3 years,
Yeah,
and once you've done that, all following reserve matters need to be submitted within 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
It is 12 years, yeah.
So, if you think that this is 1,400 houses,
Yeah,
then you might expect it would take that sort of time to build and sell that number of houses. So it may well be that it will develop in phases, or it may be all applied for at once and then come in different phases. But having this permission is key to bringing forward all the rest of the stuff, because it does, whilst 12 years sounds a long time, it's a positive sign that people are wanting to do this.
Yeah.
And not just letting the permission lapse and nothing happen.
yeah. I mean, as we all said, this is a brilliant thing. This is where the development should be. And all we're getting is things added on to Kirkham, things added on to Westham, Newton, what have you. This should be where it is. I'd like to see it come forward. Yeah. So, I mean, I support it. It's just that I can see where Westby was coming from, that will it stop, that'll be there, and then will it stop for another 3 years or more?
Morning all. So the next item on the agenda is item 4, which is planning reference 21/0904, which is land east of Peel Road, Lawns Farm, which is addressed at Balham Road in Lytham. It's for the installation of a photovoltaic solar farm, which is 23.5 megawatts in size, with associated infrastructure access via Peel Road. The application site is as per red line on the aerial image. It's north of the Lytham St Anne's conurbation area. We have Blackpool Airport to the west, and then we have the M55 running to the north. It's a 30 hectare site, presently in agricultural use, located within the countryside. The star there represents the point of connection to the national grid. So just a bit of context for you. It is a very large site. The average size of solar farms that we've dealt with presently in the past have averaged around 5 hectares in size. So it is much greater in scale, which obviously makes it more difficult for me to try and portray the site, that features and characteristics. So this is a view from the south. You've got Balham Road just running along the bottom of the image, and then we have Lawns Farm, agricultural buildings just in the foreground. We can just see the presence of housing along Balham Road. We've got a business village just to the north of the site, and then there's also a waste transfer station to the west of the site. Majority of the site boundaries are formed by mature hedgerows. The only exception to that is the southern boundary and to the northeastern boundary up here. Land levels wise, the land levels rise gradually towards a plateau in this area of the site before gradually falling away to the back of the site, and then again falling towards the east into this area of the site here. And this is a shot from the west. We've got Peel Road running in this direction. Probably gives you a better understanding of the waste transfer station. And in fairness, I've never really picked up travel along Peel Road that was there. The hedge boundaries themselves provide very good screening of that waste transfer station. And also, just to point out, we have an existing solar farm in this top left-hand corner, which is Staining Wood Solar Farm. That's a 5 megawatt solar farm, which was approved, I think, 2015, around about that time. So this is a view from the north. Again, you can pick up on the business and waste transfer. The treed area in the middle of the site, that's excluded from the development, and that relates to an existing Christmas tree enterprise that runs from the farm. You can see in that image the extent of where there's little boundary treatment to this portion of the site. So from the east, again, we can see housing on Balham Road. This property here is a Grade 2 listed building, and again, you can see good landscape cover to these houses located on Balham Road. So just to summarise, that's an aerial shot looking down. It's grazing land. It's relatively flat. It's countryside, but because of surrounding uses, it's not what we'd call an idyllic countryside setting. All of those features that I've highlighted in there appear within distant views that you do get of the application site from main roads. So just a couple of shots from inside of the site. There isn't really much to show you. It's grazing agricultural land, a couple of our ecological features such as a pond, and again just to demonstrate that northeastern corner, particularly where there isn't any boundary treatment presently. These just two photos just to demonstrate a mature hedgerow planting along the main roads of Peel Road and of Balham Road. And these three images just to show some external vantage points where there's potential visibility of the solar farm. So these green lines attempt to demonstrate areas of the site where there aren't presently any boundary features, where there could be visibility of the development. So this one's looking from Peel Road in an easterly direction, as demonstrated in the top right-hand corner. The second image is took from the south, looking from the junction of Balham Road and Peel Road, look towards the site. And the third image is took from Balham Road over in this direction over here. So moving on to the development, consent is sought for a 40-year operational life. Beyond that time, all above and below ground infrastructure will be removed and the land will be reinstated to agriculture. The blue areas identify where the arrays are going to be located. They will be south facing. The top right hand image is a section of the arrays proposed, showing the arrays being 3 meters in height to the maximum height and being set 1 meter above the ground level. The arrays will be finished in a non-reflective, non-glare coating. The arrays will also be set back 10 metres from the site boundary. That will allow the existing hedgerow and new hedgerows to be retained and mature. There's 2 metre deer mesh fencing that surrounds the perimeter from a security perspective. That's 2 metres in height. I've just dropped an area, a photograph images to what that will be looking like. There'll also be 2.5 metre pole mounted CCTV cameras dotted around the perimeter there at 30 metre intervals. The brown lines within the proposals, they represent the maintenance tracks which will be formed of crushed stone, and there'll also be a maintenance access from Peel Road which takes advantage of an existing field gate. So there's going to be a number of equipment areas dotted throughout the site. They've been located to less prominent areas, and that just gives you, well, the right hand image shows the location of those equipment areas, and the other images, they shows the nature of equipment and the colour of those equipment. Average height, say, is about 3 metres. Some are set below the 3 metres, and the switchgear cabinet just slightly above 3 metres. There's another equipment area which is in this location here, adjacent to where the maintenance access into the site. That provides a different element of development, which includes a monitoring house and substation and a storage container for spare parts, as well as a little man in a toilet. There's a further substation adjacent to the maintenance area. That is the point where the electricity will be exported from site down to the point of connection, which is adjacent to Cypress Point. Landscaping wise, all the existing hedgerows are going to be maintained at a minimum height of 3 metres. So if you recall, the perimeter fence and CCTVs, they're going to be a maximum height of 2.5 metres, so the hedgerows will act to certainly screen those structures in close views. The southern boundary in this location here, that will be allowed to grow to a height of 4.5 metres. Now the reason for that is because the land rises ever so slightly in this direction, so the 4.5 metres is envisaged to make sure that it gives a good coverage of the arrays as they flow up the hill. There's gaps been identified within the existing hedgerows. It's proposed that they will be plugged. And I've also missed off the fact that there's going to be new planting to the northeastern area where there is no hedge planting at the moment. The land beneath the arrays, that's going to be planted with rich grassland, so that will allow the grazing use to continue whilst the solar farm is operational. Obviously, it's a cattle farm at the moment, so obviously the cows won't certainly be able to graze there, but it does allow grazing for sheep. Construction and maintenance, the applicant provided a construction method statement that's provided in draft. Nonetheless, it does confirm construction routes coming from the motorway area along Peel Road in a southerly direction, and then along Balham Road, and then into the existing farm access arrangement. That will be the sole means of access, so when vehicles are exiting, they will follow the same route back out as well. Construction time frame is estimated to be 8 weeks, with approximately 15 deliveries per day. Compound and parking will be situated within the Lawns Farm holding. And again, the maintenance, once the site is operational, will be via the proposed maintenance access from Peel Road. So that covers the subject of the plan application. Moving on to the main issues, principle. The NPPF provides broad support for renewable energy development such as solar farms. Paragraph 152 states that the planning system should support the transition to a low carbon future and support renewable and low carbon energy and associated infrastructure. Paragraph 158, applicants should not demonstrate the overall need for renewable energy and recognise that even small scale projects provide a valuable contribution to cutting greenhouse gas emissions, and to approve the application if its impacts are or can be made acceptable. Paragraph 175 states that whether significant development of agricultural land is necessary, areas of poorer quality land should be preferred to those of higher quality. Higher qualities state to be grades 1, 2 or 3A, poorer qualities 3B or 4. The local plan position in terms of principle, the application site is located within the countryside. That does restrict development to retain the rural character, but does allow for development in exceptional circumstances. Of relevance to this proposal is criteria A, which refers to uses appropriate to a rural area, including those which help diversify the rural economy. The solar farm encourages that diversification and allows the grazing beneath the farming to continue as well. With regards to principle of renewables, policy CL3, that recognises that development potential is significant for that form of development within Fylde, and that renewable energy should be maximised whilst ensuring the adverse impacts are addressed. Development is supported subject to 10 criteria. Those criteria are outlined in that paragraph. In summary, with regards to principle, the proposal provides for 23.5 megawatts of energy. That's equivalent to 6,500 dwellings, a carbon reduction of over 6,000 carbon dioxide units per year, which is equivalent to 3,400 cars from the road each year. So quite a significant energy saving there. The proposal clearly provides for energy, affording general support for the principle of development, but that is subject to justification in terms of use for greenfield agricultural land in compliance with those 10 criteria policy CL3. With regards to the use of greenfield agricultural land, the applicant has provided us with an alternative site assessment that considered the availability of other sites. Those sites had to be comparable though, based upon the 30 hectares, and also within 2 kilometre distance of the connection point to the national grid. It's reported that any distance beyond that becomes unviable for the developer to construct. So that assessment concluded that there was no brownfield site availability. It did find 9 alternative greenfield sites, but for other reasons such as heritage, greenbelt location, etc., those sites have been removed from the assessment. So it's concluded that no suitable alternative brown or greenfield sites are available, and so that passes the site alternative test. With regards to agricultural land classification, there is a national classification map produced by Natural England that confirms all of the site to be grade 2. Natural England, however, advised that that is not suitable or accurate for assessment of individual plan applications, and that individual site and site-specific survey work must be carried out. On that basis, the applicant provided that assessment. That was based upon 29 boreholes across the site to determine the character of soil. From that, they were concluded that the actual site was categorised as 3B or moderate quality. So there was no loss of grade 1 or 2 or 3A. which would be the best and most versatile use of land, and so that also passes the agricultural land test. Further to that, we can see that there's grazing can be allowed underneath the solar arrays, so that the actual productive loss of agricultural that's there on site at the moment would continue. In addition, the consent is sought for a temporary period, and as I said previously, after that time, it's envisaged that the land will be reinstated to agriculture. On that basis, we can conclude that the principle is acceptable, again, though, is subject to landscape and visual impact assessment. Policies GD4, CO3 and EVO1 require that impact assessment. There's various paragraphs of the NPPF which talk about protecting the most valued landscapes, such as AONB, such as national parks, those kind of areas. PPG guidance that says that the deployment of large-scale farms can have a negative impact on the rural environment, but with visual impact of a well-planned and well-screened solar farm can be properly addressed within the landscape if planned sensitively. The site is the lowest of the landscape designations. Other than being in countryside, it doesn't have any other designation at all. It's not national park, certainly not within the Broads, AONB or Greenbelt. So from a character perspective, the site has an undulating farmland appearance, but that is punctured by the existing man-made features that surround the site. I won't go into those, but obviously the waste transfer and the business village, certainly they come into play. There's the pylon line that runs through the site, and there's a large-scale pylon site that runs just to the east as well. The development provides for the retention of the existing field pattern, so it doesn't seek to remove hedgerows and merge fields into larger fields to provide more arrays. The existing hedgerows will be retained at 3 metres. The equipment areas are located at less prominent locations of the site. There's deer fencing and CCTV will be hidden behind the hedgerows. The proposal will alter the agricultural appearance of the site, but again, that's diluted by those man-made features. So it's concluded that there's no significant impact on landscape character. With regards to visual impact, the site surprisingly isn't very prominent. There's no footpaths to Balham Road or to Peel Road. There's no public footpaths in the vicinity of the site, the nearest being 900 metres to the west or 1.6 kilometres to the east on the outskirts of Moss Side. The site isn't really visible from Preston New Road to the north. It's prominent in short view, certainly from Balham Road and from Peel Road, but those, since there's no footpaths, are from a moving vehicle and will be glimpsed through gaps in the hedgerows. There will be visibility from upper floors of several dwellings, but that impact is softened by distance, topography and existing landscaping, as well as that's proposed in the scheme. Minimal effect on distance views, that's because primarily there's no footpaths within that vicinity. We have to consider in combination views, and that's with any other solar farm that could be visible from vantage points that we can see the proposal from, and obviously Sustaining Wood solar farm in this circumstance. Those views are permissible from the vantage points of Peel Road and from Balham Road, but again, they're from a moving car. Drivers, they're trained to have their visibility on the road as opposed to surrounding fields. Passengers, they certainly will look around, but again, any visibility in combination are limited to the northeast area of the application site, which is a small part of the application site, but though glimpse views will just be through the hedgerows in any event. Again, it's a temporary visual harm. That visual harm will be removed in 40 years' time once the solar farm is non-operational. Might not be temporary for my period of lifetime. Heritage-wise, there is a Greater listed building which is located here. It's the White House. It has a rear-facing aspect towards the northeastern element of the application site. Land levels rise slightly, then fall in this direction to the east. There's good screening to the back of the garden ground to that listed building. And from my site visit, it was apparent that there was very little intervisibility from the application site to that listed building. So it's considered that the proposal at a minimum would conserve the significance of that listed building. Archaeology-wise, our colleagues at Lancashire County Council, they raised initial concerns for archaeological importance of the site. That prompted the applicant to do some on-site investigation where they found 2 human cremations. But the amount of investigation which was undertaken proved to the archaeologists that there wasn't really any significance in the development, in the archaeological remains, and that development could proceed on that basis. Residential amenity. Criteria C policy C3 supports renewable energy, but that is subject to impact assessment to residents. Neighbours located in close proximity are to the west on Peel Road and to the south on Balham Road. There's good separation and there's no impact in terms of light loss of overshadowing from the physical presence of the arrays themselves. On that basis, potential impact is limited to noise and reflected light from the arrays themselves. In relation to noise, the applicant provided us with a noise assessment. That concluded that noise levels were equivalent or equal to the existing background noise levels, and reported impact was to be low. With regards to noise, no objections were received from environmental protection. In terms of reflected light, the submission confirms that the panels will have non-glare and non-reflective films. The applicants did provide a glint and glare assessment that identified 12 properties. They'll confirm that the impact to those properties would be none due to existing landscaping and once proposed landscaping matures. The 12 properties were identified. There was 3 really which stuck out the most, and have kind of tried to highlight to yourselves the kind of impacts that might occur. In this circumstance, these properties are to the west on Peel Road, but as you can see, the majority, if not all, of the rear elevation of those properties is obscured by existing tree planting. There are views through a gap here, but again, that's from a single-storey property as well. Properties to the south on Balham Road, again, as you can see, there's substantial landscaping that will act to obscure the development from view. Lawns Farm is the, Lawns Farm, that's the farm holding that the application site is located upon. Obviously, it's a rear-facing aspect towards this area of the site. This is the southern aspect of the site where there's going to be new hedgerow planting. So that new hedgerow planting over time will offer some amenity protection to those residents, but I think on balance would have to accept a lower amenity standard for those residents, bearing in mind that they would effectively be the landlord of the operations of the solar farm. Again, no objections were raised from environmental protection. Very quickly on highways. Highways Authority didn't raise any objection. The construction route did allude to some overrunning of junctions onto grass spaces. So the Highway Authority have required some off-site works just to hard surface those areas during the construction period. Once construction is finished, then obviously those areas will be reinstated to grassland again. There are other matters relating to policy CL3, but weren't considered of significance. So subject to condition and adoption of the habitat regulation assessment, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that this seems to be a very well put together proposal. All my questions about amenity and visibility, I think, have been answered. I'd contrast it certainly with other energy proposals. I'm thinking of Preston New Road that were anything but, on the basis that it provides, well, I won't say free energy, but environmentally friendly energy, clean energy. I'm very happy to propose the recommendations as printed.
Thank you, Chairman. Only one thing I didn't hear in there was about flooding. I know the area quite well, and I've seen the area underwater by a foot of water. So if you could just give a bit of detail, certainly near the business park, that's where I've seen the large floods. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Am I right to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the one, I was only seconding it because I just wanted to say that my one concern would be the construction traffic, because I do go that way quite a lot. It's an awful road. The road surface is dreadful. You wouldn't have time to look and see if there were photovoltaic cells next to you. You're avoiding puddles and what have
Yeah,
you.
picking up on
And
that point, the
the
Highway
construction
Authority
plan.
did require a pre-construction road survey to be undertaken to ascertain what damage could be ascertained to that road during the construction period. The problem with such a condition, though, is that it's very hard to establish whether or not the construction vehicles caused the damage. Obviously, like you said, Peel Road, particularly and Balham Road into them, are very heavily trafficked. Large vehicles use those roads. So yes, they could do a survey, but we would have no way of telling whether that damage is created by the construction vehicle or by any other vehicles that are on that road. So from my perspective, it wasn't considered reasonable to apply that condition.
Well, highways have said it's all right, but I presume it will be well advertised that is going on, because the turnout from Peel Road to Balham Road is a particularly bad one.
It is,
And
yeah. I
so
believe there's
if
an
people
area
know
of
it's going
hedgerow
on-
removed from that junction to allow visibility along Balham Road whilst leaving Peel Road.
Yeah.
But it's those kind of areas whereby there's potential overrun by service vehicles, and those are where the Highway Authority want those hard standing areas to be. I just want to reaffirm that the Highway Authority did request this pre-construction road survey in their comments. They haven't objected, but did request that condition. Now, say from my perspective, I don't think it's reasonable.
Right.
So just
Yes, no, that's fine. As long as it's sort of well notified that this is going on, and it's only going to last for a limited time, because it is particularly bad. But otherwise, I very much welcome this, and maybe then we can have some heating on in this room, and we might not be as cold as we are.
Question, we have done an investigation. It's the best we can do because of the wind outside, so that's what I've been told.
shall I respond quickly to the drainage? Yeah, this area, I think here is probably the area that you're referring to. That's within flood zone 2. All right. I'm not sure about the flooding there. Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. The land levels certainly on the site are a lot higher in this area. So, yeah, I think the flood risk is more to this northeastern corner relative to the application site itself. But what the applicant has done is ensured that the equipment areas and the inverters where all the electricity will run through are outside of the flood risk areas. We've consulted with the Environment Agency and with the lead local flood authority. They don't have any objection to the scheme, subject to final details of surface water drainage to be agreed.
Thank you for that. That's fair. So the reason I raised the concern is because in the area I've seen is in the flood zone 1, and I've seen that flooded quite severely. So that's the concern. If that's the lighter part of the site.
Just a short comment from the chairman. I appreciate and understand why it's been moved and seconded for approval, but I am a little concerned in the sense that the applicant determines the state of the agricultural land as being 3B. The majority of Files countryside is 3B on that criteria. What policy are there to protect our countryside and our farming land? At one time, this planning authority did everything it could to protect farming land. We just consumed open countryside to deliver 8,000 houses. And now we are losing 66 acres, not hectares, but acres of land. To say that it would go back to agriculture in 40 years, I think is a fatuous statement. The SOP which I see is that you can continue grazing with sheep. I wonder how a sheepdog would round up the sheep on an installation of this nature. I appreciate the climate that we have to deal with, but I do have those concerns. I think it was only right I voiced them. Councillor Speak. Do you want to speak? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say this is a bittersweet application because I'm all in favour of renewable energy and solar panels, but the loss of such a massive site of agricultural land, and where we did have the county land agent in the past where we could go to and say, can you do a survey of this farmland? And you knew where you stood. And here we're looking, well, some say it's 3A and 3B, or it's poor land. It looks mighty fine agricultural land to me. So it is a very bittersweet application. And is it progress? Probably. Do I like it? No. Will it look nice? No. Will the hedges grow fast enough? Not for me. It's going to look an eyesore for a long, long time. But it's progress, I suppose.
Thank you, Chair. No, just really, it was going through my mind the same type of situation you mentioned about this vast amount of, I think you mentioned, what, 66 acres? Yeah, that is a hell of a lot of space, following on from what you were saying. The other thing which, going back to highways, I'm surprised, and I think certainly that survey, we should have some feedback from those who drive up and down Peel every morning and evening. Again, as a result, I mean, saying, can we tell, how do we know that it's the heavy vehicles? If you see the number of heavy vehicles, Fox and everything else going into that waste area, it is vast. And that particular junction going on to the business side and to the thing, it's just basically getting churned up, as well as further down. The only decent stretch is when you turn off Balham and round that corner, it's fine, and then suddenly deteriorates and the land. But I know probably nothing will ever be able to do about it, but it is a great concern. And even for 2 months, you'll have heavy vehicles, carrying the actual supplies there. It's really a worry. There's going to be a serious accident there without a shadow of a doubt.
I don't disagree. I mean, I've used Peel Road numerous times, and it's an awful road. That surface, it's not just breaking up; it's sunken in places. Like I said in my presentation, though, it'd be impossible for us to separate out the construction traffic from the normal traffic that is using that road and make the applicant redo the whole of that stretch of Peel Road, unfortunately. The only areas that we could possibly look at is where they overrun on the access arrangement, but that'll be covered in the off-site highway works. So there'll be hard standing during the construction process to allow the vehicles to make certain manoeuvres. Once construction is finished, then those hard standing areas will be removed and reinstated to whatever former appearance they were. It's, I think that from Peel Road perspective, then it requires more of a high level discussion with the highway authority to see what timeframes they have for redoing that road, and when they do redo that road, making sure it can accommodate the weight that uses it.
Obviously, just adding to that is that in the sort of short to medium term, the Hay Houses Link Road will be opened, and that should take some of the pressure of traffic off Peel Road, because as we know, the Link Road comes into Lytham, at that side of Lytham. So Peel Road is one of the sort of the routes from Lytham to the end of to Junction 4. So hopefully that will also take some of the pressure off that road in future. Not necessarily for the construction of this, but in the longer term. And then maybe that's a good time to look at the condition of the road so you're not redoing it with heavy traffic. Once it's lighter traffic and you redo it, then it might last a bit longer.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I know you don't like me speaking, but you know, you can't stop me.
It's good to have you.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's go back to the farmland that we're losing throughout this borough. I don't think we should just sit here and accept it. I think it's time that we brought this up with whoever is responsible and put a big objection forward. We keep sitting here and watching more and more of our farmland disappearing. And I think if we don't speak up, we're wasting our breath talking about it. Secondly, the Highways Authority. They are the authority that should inspect the roads. They shouldn't expect a developer to inspect roads. So again, I think it's time they started doing their job. The roads in our area are appalling. They're absolutely dismal, and it's time they did something about it. So again, I think we should be going to the Highways Authority and asking them to start doing their job and to start spending a little bit of the money that we all pay in our rates, because it's time that they started doing the job that they are paid for. So I'm sorry, but I think just sitting here and accepting it doesn't get us anywhere at all. And we're going to still keep seeing our roads deteriorate and deteriorate. And I've seen them now. There is a ditch on the way from Kirkham to Lytham, and cars have fallen into it. And all they've done is put cones out. It's dangerous. It's time they started doing their job properly. And I do think whoever is in charge at this authority should put forward a very, very big objection to what's going on.
I appreciate your comment, but the first point you made was the erosion of our countryside and agricultural land. And I take your point and support your point. We live in a peculiar time where I don't think we could refuse this application.
No,
because it would
we
be
can't.
granted on appeal.
We can't.
But
I'm
we
not
do,
suggesting.
I just warned the committee.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we refuse this.
No,
I'm
I
suggesting
understand
we
where you
start
come
to
from.
take action.
And I share your concern
Mhm.
and the way you propose to vote. But we've got to be aware that because it's classified as 3B, which is the majority of farmland in Fylde, we have no policies to protect the remaining farmland, the remaining countryside, and that does worry me.
Yeah, I agree.
Chair, can I just come in
Well,
as
could
well
I
on
just
that?
get this question in because it's related to this? And I mean, I fully support this application, but
Yeah.
in the back of my mind, there has been a sort of concern about consuming so much countryside, and particularly this application, which is a significant one, with 30 hectares, 66 acres. And what I wanted to ask, and I wanted to ask this before the debate, but I'm particularly glad to ask this question now. 300 metres away from this site, I think we refer to Staining Wood, which is another, was that small, 5 hectares or something, a very small site?
Large scale is defined as being anything over a hectare.
Right, so I think, was it 5 hectares or something?
About that,
Because that was the average anyway. But my concern was this, is that what protections do we have in terms of planning policy for somebody to come in and look at the piece of land between Staining Wood and this particular development and go, oh, well, we've got a solar field, we've got a solar panel institution there, we've got a solar panel development there. Wouldn't it be great if we took the fields out in between? Now, there's nothing stopping somebody coming, presumably with a planning application. But what I'm really saying is, we've got to be mindful that if a number of these coalesce, you a bit like ribbon development that we're concerned about in terms of urban development, you could have a massive swathe of our protected, inverted commas, countryside with just a sea of solar panels. Because, you know, there could be the argument, well, you've got a solar panel farm there, you've got a solar panel farm there. You know, the argument might go, actually, we're concentrating solar panels all in this area, and large swathes of countryside then disappear. That was going to be my question, so I hope you can sort of answer that.
The obviously, as from a landscape and a visual impact perspective, we consider the what's called the in combination effect. So that's where the proposal might be visible in combination with existing solar farms. Now that the proposal will be visible from some vantage points in combination with the Staining Wood. Now they are, if I can just remember what slide it was. Yeah, it's viewpoints really from here and from the north along Peel Road. Now obviously those views are at distance, they're not in close-up views, and they're from a car because there's no footpath to those roads or public rights of way within the vicinity for pedestrians to use. So when we talk about in combination, we have to consider the visual and the landscape impact. From a visual perspective, it's low because of the fact that any visibility is really transient from within a car. And the character obviously is defined primarily by the site itself and what surrounds it. Now, what surrounds it destroys the landscape countryside character of that site and that particular surrounding. So from that perspective, we have to my conclusion is that the landscape and visual impact is acceptable.
Rob, I just challenge your word there, because I wouldn't say it destroys, it damages it, but I think destroy is maybe a bit too strong. It does damage it.
Sorry,
can I just say one thing? I seconded it very quickly because this is the future. The diversification of farming is the big thing at the minute. This might protect that farm and allow it to continue farming, this farmer. There will still be some farming stuff with sheep and what have you. But the way we're going, you know, it's a bigger discussion, isn't it? The way this country is going and you know, we're not going to eat meat anymore. So the dairy farms are all packing in, the pig farms are all packing in. You know, it's a bigger discussion. I don't want to get into it, but I do feel that this might just protect some farming in that area.
This question of diversification and the fact that they say that sheep will be able to continue to graze, that is absolutely ridiculous. And I am asking the officers, not on the backs of this application, because I think we can accept how it's going to go, but to investigate the number of solar farms that are in practice and how many can graze sheep. And I think you'll be surprised by the answer to that. I want to move on. It's been moved by Councillor Gavin Harrison, seconded by Councillor Nulty. All in favour of the approval, please show. Anyone against? Thank you, clearly carried. I think we'll have a 5-minute break.
We can do some exercise. Shall I point the lamp over there? There's heat coming from it.
I'll go for a wee.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's like in a church, though. You know when they open and close the back doors.
I'll go.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application relates to the Queensway, Kilnhouse Lane, Richmond Point Junction, highlighted in this area here with a red line boundary. It's a full planning application for the construction of a signalised crossroads at this junction as an interim means of access to Richmond Point. So this is just to provide some context with the aerial photograph. We've got this existing access. I'm sure members have all passed this site regularly, so you'll be familiar with this temporary access that we've got off Salisbury Avenue. This is Parkinson Boulevard, which will be the new access road into the site. This is the existing haul road, so at the moment you've got construction vehicles travelling along here. And this is an allocated employment site that's referred to as site ES1. So just a bit of background in terms of what was approved as part of the original outline planning permission. So the original access was to be a roundabout. So this remains the approved long-term access into Richmond Point. The outline application was followed by subsequent applications to vary conditions and to construct the temporary access off Salisbury Avenue. There's a trigger in those conditions that requires that temporary access to be stopped up and effectively at the moment the roundabout to be delivered after the 165th dwelling. So at present we're up to approximately 128 dwellings where construction has commenced as of November 2022. So we're approaching that trigger. In terms of the wider context, the appeal for the original outline permission was a conjoined appeal with the application for the link road. So this road that runs east-west from what was proposed to be the roundabout to the new link road is what's referred to as the T5 road, or the Hay Houses bypass. This north-south road, which runs parallel to it up to the Cropper Road roundabout, is referred to as the T6 road, or the M55 link road. So when I'm talking about T5, I'm talking about this road that runs up to the M55 link road. So at the moment, this is under construction, due to be open by the end of this year. There was a modification to the planning obligation for the Queensway development in 2021 that removes the requirement for the developer to construct this T5 road and instead to transfer the land to the County Council at nil cost so that they can construct that in the future. So it removes the obligation for the developer to construct that and gives that opportunity to Lancashire County Council, albeit that there is also a requirement for the developer to deliver a separate internal access road through to T6 after occupation of the 451st dwelling. So while it wouldn't be this road, it would be an alternative access road through the site that would also link to T6, and a planning application for that is to be forthcoming in the future. The other modification as part of that change to the section 106 introduced this definition for the interim Queensway junction. So this was devised, there's been a scheme or a concept to replace the roundabout junction that was originally approved with a signalised junction for some time. The County Council designed that scheme in around about 2018, and at that time they were in discussions with the previous developer, that was Kensington, to replace the roundabout with a signalised junction. This definition was inserted to allow an interim access to Richmond Point prior to that signalised junction designed by County being delivered. So there's three tests within this definition. The first is that it must be acceptable to the local highway authority. It must satisfy the full Queensway, which is now Richmond Point, developments in a future year. And it must provide suitable, controlled, sustainable provision for pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians, surrounding bridleways. And it must have appropriate connectivity to T5, which becomes the primary route to T6. So effectively, this application is seeking planning permission for the interim Queensway junction that's defined in the section 106 in advance of the T5 road being delivered in a future year. So this is the access that we've got at the moment. This is the temporary access via this priority junction from Salisbury Avenue. So this is presently to be stopped up on the 166th dwelling. This is the southwest arm, so travelling out of St Anne's towards Blackpool. You've got a single lane eastbound, single lane westbound, and this central pedestrian refuge that's been put in place by the developer. There's also a footpath entering into the site. This is looking back, so heading towards St Anne's from Blackpool. This Queensway Park Farm access is outside the photograph to the left-hand side here. And then you've got this separate right turn lane onto Kilnhouse Lane and straight ahead into St Anne's. This is the Hall Road that's there at the moment. This is the junction approaching from Kilnhouse Lane, so left and right turn lanes onto Queensway, then a single lane heading up to Kilnhouse. You can see the Hall Road and the Weybridge in the background, which is where the new arm of the access road into Richmond Point will run. So the access road will run flanking the northern edge of these houses. So this is the overall layout. 4 arms of the junction with different works proposed within them. I'll run through each arm in detail in terms of the works that are proposed in each. But there's various reconfiguration works within the existing junction to widen carriageways and provide new footways, alter road markings and change lane configurations. The main part of the application is the construction of this new road, so that's around 223 metres long to create this new junction into Richmond Point, which will replace the temporary access via Salisbury Avenue. This red line is the approximate line of the Greenbelt boundary. So everything to the right-hand side of this line is in the Greenbelt. So everything within this northeastern arm of the junction and approximately 50% of the new access road into the site is within the Greenbelt. The other thing to notice is, or to note is that while this road is within the area of T5, and the land that will be required to deliver it, it isn't itself the T5 road. So the T5 would have different dimensions. Effectively, it would need to be widened further to the south to create extra lanes to deliver the T5 road. So it's within the same land, and it would be effectively part of the T5, but it isn't the T5 road itself. So this is the northeastern arm. The area that's within the Greenbelt. So you can see these grey markings here. This is the existing right-hand turn lane into Kilnhouse and the straight ahead lane. So effectively, each of these lanes drops down one to the south. So the carriageway is being widened on the southerly edge, so the straight ahead lane becomes straight ahead and left turn to the south, and the right turn lane drops down one. The straight ahead lane becomes the right turn lane with this filter lane onto Kilnhouse Lane. You'll then have 2 lanes on the north eastbound side heading towards Blackpool, which merge into a single lane further up past this hatching. You've also got this new footway along the south side within the existing roadside verge, and this is a Pegasus crossing that's intended to allow horses to cross over the road. So you've got these holding areas onto this bridle way that then runs past to the northeast of the employment site. Now the Queensway Park Farm access is also repositioned. So the arm to the southeast that heads into Richmond Point, you've got this new junction here, approximately 50 metres in width, with a new Toucan crossing, with this central traffic island and tactile paving, a signal maintenance bay for engineers, and then the 223 metre long road that will link up with Parkinson Boulevard as it exists at the moment, and then this termination point here, which is a turning head So coming out of St Anne's and heading towards Blackpool, the southwest arm, you've got that existing pedestrian refuge here. So that's to be repositioned as part of the traffic lights. So you'll have this new traffic island here, and you'd have one lane becomes 2 lanes. So you'll have a straight ahead and a left turn, and a straight ahead and a right turn into Richmond Point. So effectively this is being widened by eating into the Richmond Point green space at the front of that site to the south to deliver a new footway, and that existing footpath off that highway is shortened into Richmond Point. Kilnhouse Lane, very limited changes on this particular arm, some new tactile paving, pushing this cycle bay a bit further back from the edge of the carriageway, and similarly with the road markings here. That would change to a straight ahead and left turn lane, and then a separate right turn lane. So this just shows the overall junction arrangement, separate filter lanes into Kilnhouse, Richmond Point, 2 new lanes heading in the Blackpool direction from St Anne's, and then these lanes drop down to the south, heading from Blackpool to St Anne's. So, as I mentioned, part of the site is within the Greenbelt, the northeastern arm of the junction, the new access road. So, paragraph 150 of the framework refers to certain other forms of development are also not inappropriate in the Greenbelt, provided that they preserve its openness and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. So 2 of those categories are engineering operations and local transport infrastructure, which can demonstrate a requirement for a Greenbelt location. So there's 2 tests to be applied here. The first is that the development has to fall within these categories, and the second is that it must preserve Greenbelt openness and not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. So openness and how that's to be interpreted is a 3-dimensional concept which effectively denotes an absence of buildings and development, and it's got both spatial and visual aspects. So you can look at visual impact and volume. It's important to note that simply by carrying out development in the Greenbelt doesn't mean that you automatically fail to preserve its openness and conflict with the purposes of including land in it. Otherwise, that would effectively nullify the allowances in paragraph 150. So when you're looking at whether or not it preserves openness or conflicts with purposes, you're looking at issues of scale, extent, and the degree of harm that's arising. So in this particular case, we've got the fallback position to take into account. So the outline permission establishes the principle of a roundabout access with a much greater land take than this junction and greater encroachment into that area of Greenbelt, along with just over a kilometre long T5 road cutting across the Greenbelt. So that required very special circumstances to allow it as part of the appeal. But what we're looking at here is a much more slimmed down version of that scheme in terms of the length of the road, being around 1/5 of the length of T5, and the fact that the extant permission establishes the need for this development to happen within the Greenbelt in order to deliver an access to Richmond Point. So you couldn't deliver that access without some encroachment into the Greenbelt. The scale is limited to the engineering operations on the northeastern arm of the junction, so widening the carriageway, the footway provision and the Pegasus crossing, and only approximately 50% of the Richmond Point access road is within the Greenbelt. That's also got to be seen in the context that those features appear. So you've got the engineering operations within the highway alongside other highway infrastructure and street furniture. So it's seen against the urbanised context of that junction, and the access road is on the periphery of the settlement boundary where that transitions into Greenbelt along the northern edge of the Richmond Point development. So you're looking at these features against the backdrop of that housing at Richmond Point. So it's an urbanised context at the transition between the urban area and the Greenbelt. So the conclusion is that the proposed development falls within
either category B or C. So B for the operations within the highway and C for the new Richmond Point access road. And that there's no, the level of harm to openness is not one that fails to preserve that openness, and that there is no conflict with the purposes of including land within the green belt arising from the proposal, and in turn it's not inappropriate development in the green belt, and it doesn't require very special circumstances to justify it. The other main issue is highways. The capacity of this junction has been tested very robustly as part of the transport assessment. I've just included some annotations here to clarify what these acronyms means. So this is the degree of saturation. So what you're looking for is anything below 90% is satisfactory operation, and anything that's 100% plus is overloaded. So you can see all these figures that there's a headroom of around at least 18% capacity within each arm of the junction here. The mean maximum queue is the number of vehicles that are added to the back of the queue before it clears. So the mean number of vehicles that will join the back of the queue while you're waiting to pass through those different arms of the junction. So this capacity analysis is for the year 2033. So this is the future year that's referred to in the definition of the interim Queensway junction, as agreed with the Highway Authority. So that includes background or predicted background traffic growth on the network up to 2033. It also assumes that the level of traffic from the Richmond Point development will be for 948 dwellings. But members might recall that we've granted a recent permission to vary that permission, which reduces the overall number to 898. We've also got a pending application to make similar changes to another parcel that will reduce it down to 856. So that test is extremely robust, given that that number of dwellings is unlikely to be constructed. It also looks at in combination effects with other committed developments, including Windyke, Cropper Road, Old Houses Lane and the nearby employment site, and assumes that all the traffic from this development will travel through this junction, which again is very unlikely to happen. And finally, that 30% of traffic that's redistributed or would be redistributed from Queensway through the Richmond Point development onto T6 after that internal road is delivered post the 451st dwelling. Again, that's unlikely to be the case because it won't be a very attractive route. It'll be a longer route and more convoluted route than travelling through Cypress Point or along Hay Houses Lane. So on that basis, LCC consider the assessment to be a robust one, and that there's practical or spare practical reserve capacity, which is these figures here, within that junction in 2023 with a minimum headroom of 8.3%. One of the objections that we've received in connection with the application, that the main objection was on technical grounds about the relationship and the interface between the new interim Queensway junction and the access that's been approved to employment site ES1. So in 2019, an application was granted for an access into the employment site. It should be noted that that access was simply a field access. There was no other development behind it, although it assumed that just over 15,000 square metres of employment uses would be delivered on that site. This is a junction arrangement that was designed by Lancashire County Council as part of the wider change to the Queensway junction to replace the roundabout with a signalised junction. And this plan here effectively shows the proposed interim Queensway junction overlaid on this approved junction arrangement, and the areas that are in magenta here are showing the only changes that are needed to deliver both junctions. So this is effectively white lines on the road and carriageway markings that would need to change to deliver both junctions. There's no other physical works other than you'd construct less footways on these sides of the employment access if the interim Queensway junction is delivered first. But the important point here is that the proposed junction doesn't prejudice this junction that's been approved. In terms of design and landscaping, the junction is identified as a gateway in the neighbourhood plan. This is an illustrative landscaping scheme that's been submitted to show how this frontage would be treated with Queensway. One of the conditions on the planning permission requires the enhancement of this landscaping to deliver the tree-lined streets that are referred to in the National Planning Policy Framework. The expectation is that this belt of trees would be extended around both sides of the junction to create this tree-lined boulevard into the site, very similar to what's been done at Cypress Point. And also there's a condition about the design of street furniture and trying to get some enhancements in that respect beyond Lancashire County Council's standardised requirements. Again, Cypress Point's a good precedent for what we would be looking to achieve through those conditions. In terms of neighbour amenity, it's a long established principle that there would be an access road running along the northern side of these properties, and that this would link up with Parkinson Boulevard to provide the main access into the site. There's buffering between these houses through the internal shared drives and landscape verges to make sure that there's a separation between the houses and the road and avoid any harmful effects on amenity. So in summary, as I referred to in the Greenbelt, the highway modification works to the northeastern arm of the junction, and around 50% of the access road into Richmond Point are in the Greenbelt. Those elements fall within categories in paragraph 150, where they're not inappropriate in the Greenbelt as long as they preserve openness and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. And I've mentioned the reasons why that conclusion has been reached in this case. Therefore, it's not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and doesn't require very special circumstances. In terms of highway safety and capacity, there's no prejudicial impact on the approved employment access into site ES1. Both can be constructed independently with very minimal changes to highway markings, regardless of which comes forward first. Junction capacity assessment is robust and demonstrates that there's spare capacity in 2033, the future year that's referred to in the definition of the interim Queensway junction, in a very robust worst case scenario with those cumulative impacts that I mentioned earlier. So the proposal meets all the tests of the interim Queensway junction that's required by the definition in the 106. There's no objections from the Highway Authority. Issues relating to landscaping and street furniture are secured by conditions as part of the detailed design. There's no adverse impacts on neighbouring residents in terms of noise or visual impact. It's a smaller scheme than the extant permission for T5. The site's wholly within flood zone 1. There's drainage conditions imposed, requested by the LLFA, and there's a shadow HRA that demonstrates there's no mitigation required above and beyond the farmland conservation area that's already been laid out as part of the scheme. So the resolution before members is to delegate authority to the head of planning to grant permission, subject to the approval of a section 106A application, which will modify the definition of planning permission and interim Queensway junction in the current agreement to refer specifically to this application and link it with the existing 106, and the adoption of the shadow habitat regulations assessment and conditions, of which there are some amendments set out in the late observations. Yeah, that's correct, Chairman. The only outstanding matter would be the subsequent completion of that 106 agreement to alter those definitions.
Couple of questions, really. The triggers for the amount of housing that was one of the triggers on the completion of 900 and something odd houses, but yet further down the presentation it was saying that the houses reduced to a number of 800 and something. So how can the
There's two triggers in terms of highway works. The first is the stopping up of this temporary access onto Salisbury Avenue. That's currently on the construction of the 166th dwelling, so you can't occupy more than 165 until that access is blocked up. The second is the delivery of an internal road between this junction and the T6, and that's prior to the occupation of the 451st dwelling. So these triggers have really come about because the scheme is split up into a series of parcels, and those numbers related to the figures that within each of those parcels at that time. But we're still, even with the changes that have been made to the scheme to reduce the number, we're still well within meeting this trigger.
Right, okay, and the T5 that will what's your time frame for that actually being extended to meet with the T6? What do you have it, or is that just going to be
It's
wait and see?
So there's, in terms of what's in the 106, the requirement is to transfer the land required to build this road to the county council at nil cost. And the deadline for that is either 10 years from construction of the 550th dwelling or the 1st of January 2041, whichever occurs first. So it's a much longer term plan. That's the time frame for actually transferring the land. That's not for the road to be constructed. So it's then within the county's gift to construct that.
Good luck with that one.
In the future at their leisure. It's a similar situation to the T6 in the sense that it's going to require public money to deliver that road in the future.
It's a bit pie in the sky, a lot of it, isn't it, really? But and all said and done. Right, the very last question, sorry, the actual crossings on the new road layout, are they going to be linked to the traffic lights so that all the traffic will stop and all the crossings will work at the same time, or will there be different different phases? It just causes a lot of traffic stop, doesn't it? If they're all out of sync, if all lights are on red and then the crossings work, that's fine. But if like one crossing works, but yet you've got green cars going across, it just. Do you know what I mean?
I can't answer your
know.
question because it's something that would be part of the highway design and the way that the lights are linked. It's not something that I can answer to. No, it's an issue for the highway authority, how that's all synced. I appreciate what you're saying, that you don't want to stop all the traffic travelling through the junction for someone to cross in one particular location.
Yeah. Thank you.
Linda.
Just in relation to delegating this to head of planning, one of the things that's asked for is removing the pre-commencement triggers. I can understand where they're coming from with that, but if we do that, will there be other triggers to make sure that, I'm presuming the head of planning will do that, but we need assurances, I think, particularly with the drainage and what have you conditions that they're wanting to delay, that something will be put in place of pre-commencement so that we've got some idea that things will actually happen.
Yeah, so the changes to the conditions are to exclude two specific things. So the first is to allow the site to be cleared. So that's kind of vegetation clearance and groundwork scraping off the top layers of the land. The second is then the surcharging of the land. So basically bringing material onto the site, as members might be aware, it's pretty poor ground on Richmond Point. So on the earlier phases of development, a lot of materials brought onto the site. That's then deposited, it settles down in kind of layers before you can construct anything on top of it. So what the condition is intended to allow is to allow those ground preparation works to take place before you have to discharge the condition. You couldn't then start actually physically building the road until afterwards. And the issue with the drainage condition is that while you're doing those surcharging works, there isn't any formal drainage infrastructure that's been put in for the road, because that follows your surcharging work. So you do those afterwards before you start building the road. So there's no pipe work basically in place to take your water away from the road until you start actually building it properly, when you've just done the surcharging works.
Right.
So that's the reason for the changes to the wording, to allow those initial groundworks to take place in advance of any other works of construction.
I think I follow you. I'm just, I'm just aware that sometimes, we put these sort of conditions on pre-commencement and things don't happen, and then nothing happens forever after that. And I just, I can't give you an example.
I think what's also different with this scheme is that it isn't just the planning permission. There's also a requirement for a Section 278 agreement with the Highway Authority. So effectively, the Highway Authority are going to have ultimate oversight of this road construction scheme. So there's two elements to it.
I'm concerned with drainage stuff actually being done, because very often it just isn't, and whatever.
Yeah, just in terms of that particular question, I presume this is the adopted highway in the long run, and therefore the drainage will have to be sorted anyway as part of the adoption, let alone any planning conditions.
If it's adopted, when it's adopted, won't be in our lifetime. Okay.
Yeah, if I could just, 3 points really. One, and I know you've already mentioned this, but I just wanted to reassure people, quite a few St Anne's councillors have mentioned this to me, that obviously in terms of this being a gateway location, a signalised junction, it's the first sort of access into the St Anne's area. They want this to look good and to be appropriate as an entrance into St Anne's, and therefore one of the discussions we've had is about landscaping, and Matthew's already said what you saw in the plan is a bit indicative, but there's far more than that, I think, that will be put, a bit like Cypress Point, that it is a special sort of gateway. Do you want to comment on that, Matthew? But you've already sort of said that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah. Would you like me to bring up an image of Cypress Point? If I'll just very quickly go on to Google Maps just to give you kind of an idea of the type of thing that we'd be expecting to be replicated here. The council's Wi-Fi is not brilliant, I'm afraid.
Don't worry, I think we've got them. Yeah, we're okay.
You sure? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, really, it's that tree-lined boulevard concept where you've got quite a linear row of trees on both sides. Obviously, I'm sure all our members have driven up that stretch of Blackpool Road heading up towards Cypress Point, and you're aware of that gateway before you go into the main access, where you've just got these kind of linear belts of trees on each side of the road. You've got some better kind of guardrails around the traffic islands, and some better surfacing, some bespoke lighting columns, that type of thing. I think Cypress Point is really the precedent, if you like, for the thing that we'd be aiming for, the type of treatments.
That's good, thank you.
Consider in all areas of the borough, please, Chairman, which are just as important as Cypress Point.
And I was anticipating just that, but by raising it in, by raising this in this context, it's sort of right. The other point that come up in discussion, I think, is that, one of the concerns that I had was sort of the actual construction of this, because anybody who knows, and I know more than most, that Queensway, is a really very busy road. And one of the things, of course, is that this will not be constructed until after the link road is completed. So that's going to be a positive thing. But I have pointed out, and I'm sure you would share my concerns, I have pointed out to officers that the management of this construction will have to be really thoughtfully sort of gone through, because the potential for serious congestion and disruption of traffic in that area, well, I think we would all agree that's got to be something that is factored in. And the last point, which is in the report, I think, is that I think I read in there that one of the other things that has been factored in terms of traffic flows and future demand and pressure on this network is the enterprise zone, in terms of that being opened up, which is going to give some additional traffic. And I know that's been taken into account, isn't it, in terms of the specification?
Yeah, the county council have referred to the enterprise zone as part of the kind of combined impact with this junction. So they're satisfied that there isn't any additional traffic from the enterprise zone that would, undermine the capacity of this junction. As I mentioned in the presentation, this is a very kind of robust testing of the junction's capacity that assumes or makes a number of assumptions that are actually very unlikely to happen in reality. So on that basis, it's the Highway Authority are confident that this has that spare capacity up to 2033, prior to the delivery of the T5 road in the future, which is in their gift.
Yeah, if you want me to do item 1, I'll do that, yeah. There.
Which are we doing then?
Item 1. Item 1.
What?
1.
Followed by item 2.
Page 5.
Item 1.
What would be upheld?
Item 1. Lytham Police Station. Lytham Courthouse and Police Station. 2 applications, which are an adjoining site, which are in the middle of Lytham, as you can see from that plan. Right. So, the first one relates to an area of land which is to the rear of the courthouse building and the police station building. It was formerly the yard area associated with the principal with the police station operation. And I don't think the building's been used since '96, so it's over 20 years that it's all been vacant, and as a result, the whole site's looking untidy. The courthouse is Grade 2 listed, and is in the conservation area and in the town centre. And therefore it's also in the settlement area of Lytham. Surrounding use is predominantly residential. So we've got 3 applications on this site. The courthouse is a wider site. One for the residential development of this yard area to the rear for 4 properties. One for the conversion of the courthouse and some former police houses into 4 properties. And then one for listed building consent for those works, because that's a listed building. So items 1 and 2 are the 2 planning applications for the residential development. The listed building application is not on today's agenda, because it's not ready for decision as yet. But is a matter that I would expect to be delegated. The officer recommendation on the 2 applications is to delegate the decision to officers. Now, that's because the recommendation is to support the scheme in principle, subject to further detailed work. But a bit like the Blackburn's Farm we had a few meetings ago, and in line with comments that have been made in the peer review, I wanted to get committee views, vibes on the approach we're taking before I went too far down the line in terms of the final decision. So I wanted to, I'll go through the issues, but the recommendation is a finely balanced one. So I wanted to make sure that was in line with committee's wishes. So the schemes, starting with the police yard scheme. So this is the whole site, the yellow and the red together. The site that we're talking about with the first application is the red, the second application is the yellow. So we'll just focus on the red at the moment. So this is Bannister Street, so the Lytham Greens. Not showing up on screen. Oh. This is Bannister Street, thank you, Mark. This is Bannister Street, so that leads to West Beach and the Green. We've got George Street to the north, North Clifton Street to the south. Those are both adopted highways, but they are both narrow and are restricted in their use by parked vehicles. There's parking bays down one side of each road, but it remains narrow. That's the building. So this is from Bannister Street from the front. So really for orientation, this slide. North Clifton Street looks down there, mainly terraced properties. George Street goes down the other side and is really the back street to the properties on Westby Street. There's a club of some description at the bottom, Catholic club at the bottom, that's right. So other than the Catholic club and a few sort of incidental storage buildings, it's generally residential. So just to show you how it looks, that's North Clifton Street. So you can see that it's narrow. You've got a line of parked cars and then you can get one car down it. So this is the police houses that are subject to the next application on the left. And then that's the end gable of those police houses looking the other way. And the site that we're looking at is this yard area between that police house gable and this existing residential property, number 50. Down George Street, similar situation, parked cars down one side, resident parking bays. And this is the bottom of the gardens to the Westby Street properties. This other picture shows the site itself. So the yard area, this is the other side of the yard through these gates. This is the back of the police, these are the back of the police houses here. And then this is a 2-storey building that's been part of the police accommodation. And the proposal on the second application includes the demolition of that building. So this application has been with us since Kieran Birch was the case officer and involves the erection of 4 dwellings. So it's the bit within the red square. And the plans are a little bit fussy, but what you're looking at here is 1, 2, 3, 4 properties that front onto George Street, have a back elevation here, back gardens behind them. And at the time of the report being written, they had a proposal for a parking area in that mottled area that you see there. So that was intended to provide parking for one vehicle. Now, the Highway Authority were understandably concerned that those parking spaces would be difficult to access. So since the report was written, we've gone back to the agent and said to him, you need to show us how you can get into those spaces. And he said, you can't. So the report refers to the potential for there being 1 space, but in the late observations, that's now no spaces. So the proposal is for the erection of a terrace of 4 properties, which provide 3 bedrooms, but provide no parking. And I'll come on to parking later. This is the scheme in a little bit more detail. So this is just showing what I've shown you in the last slide, and then the first floor. So you can see you've got the 3 bedrooms. This is the elevations of what they're showing. So the top one looks from George Street. So these are the 4 properties that are subject to this application, 2-storey terrace properties. This is from North Clifton Street. So this is the back of them, albeit that that's set in from the road boundary because you've now got this garden area where the parking was initially proposed. Okay, planning issues. First one, principle. It's in the settlement. It's previously developed land. We should be using previously developed land for residential purposes where possible. Surrounding properties are largely residential. It fits with the character of the area. You have terrace properties on those streets. This is more terraced properties. It's also in the town centre, and whilst residential isn't a use that's particularly promoted in the town centre in the local plan, it is a good use for a town centre location. It's getting people into the town centre for living and shopping and all those things that we want people to do in our town centres. In terms of the design is good. It reflects the scale, the character of the neighbouring properties. We could progress the materials and things to make sure that all works. So I don't have a concern about the principle of that residential development in that respect. Access, as I said, both streets are narrow, but both streets are adopted. Both streets have a reasonable access to Bannister Street. Good visibility at that point. So in terms of the accessibility, that's fine. In terms of the parking levels, we need to be mindful that there is no parking being provided as part of this scheme. So what we're looking at is, whilst it's a highly accessible location, it's one that's providing relatively modest levels of accommodation. There are parking pressures in the area. All the residents who've commented on the application have raised that as an issue. So we need to be mindful that that is perhaps a negative factor from this development, in that you are proposing properties without any parking. Now, obviously it's a long time since the police and the courthouse operated, but that it remains its lawful use, and there would be some parking associated with that. But, you know, like we say, things may have moved on. This is just some images to show the parking arrangement. So this is the parking plan that he provided. So whilst he could get out of those spaces, you would need to clear away all those resident parking bays to allow the use of the second side of the road. And you can see that that's a photo I took one morning on my way to work at 8 o'clock. So you can see that the bays are all used. It's obviously terraced houses, and it's an area where there will be parking demands. So that's why that parking has now been replaced by a garden area. The next aspect, residential amenity. I think I mentioned earlier, we'd normally look for a 21-metre separation. This provides notably less than 21 metres. If an earlier version of this scheme proposed that the dwellings be fronted onto North Clifton Street. There are already, if you look down here, there are already properties that face each other across North Clifton Street at a distance of about 7 or 8 metres. So those are very close. So when their original proposal was to extend that terrace to fill that gap, that was unacceptable to these neighbours. So that's why that's been changed. But the change still remains very close. This is an aerial image that roughly shows where the dwellings, so the orange square is the dwellings, the terrace of dwellings. So to the south, to North Clifton Street, you've got a face-to-face distance. Sorry, you've got the front of the North Clifton properties facing the back of the proposed dwellings at a distance of about 14 metres. On the other side, you've got a distance of around 5 or 6 metres before the back boundaries of the Westby Street properties, sort of across George Street. Then those properties got a mixture of garages, yard areas, gardens, extensions. So it's difficult to say where exactly the amenity would be impacted, but I've marked on the 21 metres, so you can see that in every case it's less than that. Okay. We've also got a property here. So you've got, that property's got a window at first floor in this outrigger. So you've got potential impact because you've got a 2-storey gable alongside that property. So if I've got a picture that shows that, if I go back. So it's this property here, and their garden doesn't show it very well. I should have looked the other way, but their garden is up against this corner here. So there are amenity compromises that we would have to accept if this site was to be developed. We've sat down with the agent, walked the site with the agent, looked at various options in terms of the number of dwellings. They originally proposed 6 dwellings and they had them sort of back to back. We reduced it to a terrace of 4, had them the other way, then had them this way, and we feel that this is perhaps the least worst arrangement. But you are looking at compromises there to bring this site forward. So, as a summary, the site's bringing forward housing, it's bringing it forward in sustainable location, it's bringing it forward in a way that will add to the vibrancy of the town centre, and it's bringing forward development of a site that's been empty for 20 odd years. It's a listed building. It's not creating any particular harm to the listed building. So there's no heritage issues there. But we do have that compromise in that there's no parking, and we have a compromise in terms of neighbouring amenity issues on all sides. Although one of the issues in the report talks about occupier amenity from the limited parking areas, limited garden areas. That's now addressed by the removal of the parking from those areas, because they now have a reasonable garden area as a consequence. So, as I said, this is the least worst, and mindful of the peer review involving committee at an earlier stage. I appreciate it's just 3 years since the application was submitted, but before we work further on the final details and drafting conditions and things, I wanted to seek committee's views, but the officer recommendation, to be clear, is one that recommends that the compromises are ones that can be accepted to bring forward the development of the site. Therefore, the recommendation is that you support it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Oh, no, yeah, I think you want more water. You get some water? Yeah.
Sorry?
You want some more water?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Right. No, when I first looked at this, I mean, this area itself sort of boggles the Western mind, really, because it's been neglected for so long, well over 20 odd years. Nothing's been done with it. I mean, fairly recently, I think applications were going for restaurants or something like that, wasn't it, initially? Going back a bit.
There have been proposals for that
Yeah,
nature
yeah.
of use, but nothing.
No, but nothing's really been done. It is a total eyesore. I mean, as you know, it is basically next to the old library there, the Hewitt rooms and so on. And when we, led the Rotary, was doing this wrap up, you know, collecting coats and so on, we were using that. The Barbara Council gave us that to store these things. So we had to sort of try and park down there to load the coats up through this door at the side. And you realise just how narrow it is. So it has been an eyesore, as I mentioned. The building must have been beautiful, Edwardian style and everything, but it's just been, nothing's been done to it at all. And the first thing, as mentioned before, is the whole question of parking and congestion and so on. And I'm glad at least they've realised that there's been problems there. I think certainly this would have initially warranted a site visit to just go and have a look and just to see what the situation is there. But I mean, Andrew's photograph certainly highlighted, but it may have been used as a visit. At the back, just combined the other side of things as well, there was an old caravan there, and the place was a total mess. So I'm glad in a way that something is being done, but how one gets round it in some form of compromise, I really don't know, Chair. I mean, I wouldn't like to go against it, but I think it's the implications for it is enormous. I mean, I don't know if there's no parking there at all, and they've got rid of that. You know, I don't know just what sort of type of people are going to be there, just actually get living there without a car. The parking around that area in Westford Street is just a normal situation. It's terrible. So I really don't know where they're going to actually, you know, park, assuming that they have a car.
I appreciate you.
Just on the parking element, there are those parking bays that I've shown on the images are resident-only parking bays. So I assume the Lancashire County Council operate a residents' parking scheme there. You apply for a permit and then take your chances at getting one of those spaces. I think the permits also allow you to park on the Pleasant Street car park, which is a Far Council one. So that would be an option open to you as a resident there. But clearly the availability of on-street parking outside somebody's property in an area of terraced streets is not going to happen.
It's strange that you mentioned about the site visit, because I went down yesterday and had a walk around. And to be fair, you're also right to point out the presentation really shows this up. North Clifton Street and George Street, either end of the police house, they are narrow. I tell you what hits you is, you know, that this site has been vacant for 27 years. 27 years, and it shows it. You've got two narrow streets, North Clifton Street and George Street. And I think the decision to go with 4 rather than 6 was a sensible one. And also to skew the houses so that they were facing George Street, which means they're looking towards the back gardens of Westby Street. Because if you did it the other way round on North Clifton Street, you'd got that almost, well, just the street separating terraced houses from terraced houses. And this is not an ordinary terrace street. This is a more narrow terrace street than you would see in most sort of residential areas. And when I looked at this and I walked around and I was making some notes as well, I kept coming back to this is a typical example of sort of a balance, because there are some things regarding parking in the narrow streets that make you very uncomfortable about, you know, recommending this. And you can say it's a settlement area. You can say there are certainly these houses that are proposed are very much in character with the local character of the area, because you've got existing terraced houses of that kind already there. The challenge is the parking, and in a strange way, when they put the parking in, everybody would put the same question: how are you going to turn in? How are you going to be able to do that? You can't do it with parked traffic there. So it was right to pull that as well, and actually give people a bit of outside space behind their dwellings. So in the report, it mentions there have been a lot of revisions to the original planning application. I think the officers ought to get credit for working very hard with the agent to make this application even one that could be put forward for consideration. Bearing in mind the problems here. The balance is, and I've mentioned some of these already, public benefits are, you know, housing development, redevelopment, you know, vitality and vibrancy of the town centre. You're going to get people living there. And I know Councillor Ray raised this, well, who would move into 3-bedroom houses, you know, that don't have parking and everything? In a way, that's not a planning argument, I would say.
No, I get
Because you've got terraced houses all along that road who are in exactly the same position. You know, people who don't have specific, apart from parking permits, they don't have driveways, etc. That is the nature of the area. I mean, it's such an unattractive site at the moment. You know, my view is I come down on, and we're only looking at this specific application, that these 4 terraced houses, and there are compromises here in terms of planning, there's no doubt about that. I'm not going to be dishonest about that. I'm not totally comfortable with this parking situation, but I think these 4 houses would represent a huge improvement on the street scene here and provide sort of, you know, small but excellent accommodation that would fit in with the character of the area. I mean, I'm willing to recommend this, but I realise that there probably are other elements to the debate that people, but I'm willing to recommend it because I think it is actually effectively using this particular site in a positive way, providing housing in keeping with a local character, despite the constraints.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this committee has approved I think 3 or 4 applications in Kirkham, which are very similar to this, except the ones in Kirkham have not been near the town centre. And yet it has been quoted in the report that these are quite close to the town centre and therefore people can park within the town centre car parking. This is much closer to the town centre. And I think it's a compromise. And you've got to look and say, are we going to see this area developed and look better? Or are we going to see it stay as a complete mess? Because whatever you have there will require parking. Nowadays, everything requires car parking. And so I will vote for this. I do think we should approve it. And I don't like approving things that don't have car parking. But there are times when you have to look at sites and say, there's no way you can develop anything there without providing car parking. And therefore, you've got to suck it and see, really, haven't you? And so I do believe that we should go for this. I'm sorry that it hasn't got car parking, but from what I've seen of the site, I think it's fairly impossible to provide enough car parking for anything of any value and size. And yes, people now do have cars. Families live there and have cars, and they're going to have to park somewhere. So there may be a few arguments between existing car parking people, unless they are permit parking. And that will sort out the existing people, and the new people will just have to go and find somewhere else to go and park, I'm afraid. But when they buy the houses, they know what they're paying for, and they know they haven't got car parking.
We had a similar situation in Kirkham recently.
Yeah. Yeah. It's happened 3 or 4 times in Kirkham in the last year or so, I would say. And I'm not happy with it. I'm not happy with it at all. But, you know, what else can you do?
Anyone else wishes to speak? Must be moved by the Vice Chairman and seconded by Councillor Ross. We'll dwell on that for a little while. All in favour of approval, please show. Those against? Yes, unanimous, thank you. We'll move on to item 2.
Last one. Right, same site, next door. So this is the same picture, swap the colours round. So we're now looking at the red area here, which is the Courts House building at the front into Bannister Street. That extends back to around here, and then we've got 3 properties that Courthouse back to around here. Then we've got this area here, which is 3, which will have been police houses when built and then used as police accommodation, office accommodation. So the idea is to convert those 3 into dwellings, convert this courthouse into a dwelling with a residential annex, and then demolish this area, which is that 2-storey flat-roofed office building I showed you earlier, and that provides the parking and garden areas for the 4 properties. So this is the scheme, and again the plans are quite difficult, but looking at them in, this is splits them into 2. So we've got, this is the front line of the courthouse building, 2 parking spaces at the front onto its forecourt and a garden area created at either corner. That provides a dwelling with a residential annex. And then the police houses, 1, 2, 3 dwellings, a conversion of the existing building, so their front elevation is onto North Clifton Street, back elevation here, garden areas to here, and then a parking space for each property here, and then a collective bin store and a cycle store for those properties out of the bit that's left over. That's just the first floor, so it shows that they are 2 and 3 bedroom properties here, and this is a 3 bedroom property with a 1 bedroom annex. That's the same picture, just to orientate yourself. This is what they're proposing to do to the front of the building. So nothing. Keep the listed building as is. The only change is that they're making, at the moment, the forecourt of it is all open, so it's used for informal parking. That's to be enclosed by a small wall around the 2 corner garden areas, leaving the entrance bit in front of this bay feature for the 2 parking spaces and the entrance to the front access, pedestrian access to the front door. These are the 2 side elevations. So top one is North Clifton Street. So no changes to the courthouse element. No real changes to these 3 police houses, other than a window is bricked up here because the division between 2 of the properties goes down that line. So they fill in that window. To the other side, no changes, other than that 2-storey building is demolished and a wall which forms the boundary of the properties. So these are the North Clifton Street. This is slightly up the road. So this is the side of the courthouse and then the side of the police houses. So you can see the doorways are there, the windows are there. This is the window that gets reinstated as half a window. The courthouse faces onto the side of the library, Councillor Thomas refers to. So we've not got any residential relationships there. The police houses face onto residential properties, so we do have close privacy issues there. So again, we're talking about a compromise in that because the distances are really close for residential neighbours. But these were built as police houses, so have had that use. The building's no bigger, so you don't have that change there. George Street side, again, this bit of the building is the courthouse. That doesn't change. This building is demolished, which I think is probably a benefit from the scheme because it looks fairly mediocre in its design, shall we say. It also allows views of the back of the building to be seen, as well as the benefit in terms of garden space and light into windows and things like that. So, same arguments, good use, previously developed site, conversion's done sensitive to a listed building. The demolition doesn't cause any harm because it's a rubbish building. This does provide parking, but there are amenity compromises. But perhaps going back to the point that Councillor Redcliffe made, the building's been empty for years, and this is a good reuse of it. So officers are asking for authority to carry on working with the developer to sort out any fine details, to sort out the internal arrangements. That's where the listed building consent application comes in, and draft up a load of conditions and progress things to a conclusion and grant planning permission.
Thank you. First of all, I'm delighted and not a little envious to see the words wine cellar on the development plan. I think it rejuvenates the area. I mean, I know this area quite well. My stepdaughter used to live on North Clifton Street, and I think this would certainly be a good proposal. I'm happy to propose.
And it's been moved by Captain Ashton, seconded by Helen Speed, all in favour of the recommendation to carry this in house. Thank you. That concludes the notice of the appeal. That concludes this morning's meeting. Thank you for your diligence and attendance.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lunch in the men's room. There's some lunch in the men's room.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've just knocked the stuff over. I don't know there is.
It's got names and telephone numbers on. Yeah, I ticked you off. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Just to speak, if they play.
Right, remove
Or if you
Councillor
withdraw it yourself.
Holland's name.
Yeah, thank you.
Fine.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I just mention, next time we might remove Councillor Mulholland's name from the agenda.
Yes, sorry, the agenda has been published
Yeah.
already, but yes, thank
All
you,
right.
that's been noted. Thank you. Thank you. Is that all right? Are you all right?
Have we got everything? No? Forgot my handbag. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I took the chair then.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, right. Any problem?